Okay. All right, everyone, the meeting is called to order. The meeting for the Medfield Board of Selectmen for Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. As always, this meeting is being video recorded. It is also being broadcast out via Zoom. Hopefully that's all working. For those of you watching via Zoom or on YouTube and wishing to participate potentially that way. We'll begin, as always, with a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to begin with, it's supposed to be the Dale Street School Building Committee and the Warrant Committee. And the Warrant Committee is meeting downstairs. And so hopefully they are coming in. I'll give them a minute to get here, and then we'll get into this discussion. Welcome.
We left the computer downstairs. Is that okay?
Nope. Okay.
All right.
You just announced that to the town?
Unattended laptop.
There's a free computer in the Warrant Committee room. All right. Welcome to the Warrant Committee, to Mike Quinlan on behalf of the Dale Street School Building Committee. Mike, are you expecting anybody else? All right. So we're here to discuss the school project costs and financing options for the project. Christine, do you want to start us off, or who's going to start us off?
I think Mike are you starting off with the presentation, a summary of the presentation that you gave last week?
I can give one.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting to
Okay.
present, but
Okay.
I'm happy to talk it through. I don't have it with
I'll bring
me.
it.
Might just go to the podium and grab the mic.
What's that?
Go to the podium and grab the mic, whatever you prefer.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting to present anything,
I thought you were just giving a summary
Sure.
of what you had talked about last
Sure.
week.
There is a presentation.
Yeah.
Well, you should have that already.
Yeah, we do have that.
So, do you have an extra copy? Sorry. Perfect. So we did hold a community forum last Wednesday. I thought it was a really good conversation about the costs and impacts, and it certainly, the Q&A deviated from that topic, but we walked through the current total project budget, talked about all the individual line items and what's included in them. And then we talked about the tax impact, which we received information from Christine and Nick through our bond advisors that had two different borrowing scenarios, a 30-year bond at 2.25% and a 20-year bond at 1.75%. And then what we did is we put together costs for the average, or I think is it average or median, Christine? I always forget this. The 692?
That's the average.
Average, okay, thank you. So the average assessed value in Medfield of $692,000. So we put together cost impacts for that typical house and the differences between the scenario one as a 30-year. Thanks, Sharon. I don't want this to fall.
We have an extra one down on the floor.
Yeah.
That's right. Grab the one downstairs. So let me get to the numbers just so we make sure people understand. So we have a total project budget of $81,393,000 and change. Let me find it here. 663. $81,893,663. That's total project budget. We already have $1 million that we have appropriated for the feasibility study portion of that. So the vote request at town meeting will be to approve the $80,893,633 budget. However, we're still working out the final numbers with the MSBA, but we're anticipating a little more than, well, maybe a lot more than, but not a ton more. A little over $19.5 million in MSBA reimbursement, in which we also learned this week that our MSBA reimbursement rate went up by just short of 2 points. So that's a good thing. It was great to get that good news. So the exact number on the reimbursement has changed even since last week's presentation. So we're still basically looking at approximately a $63 million town share for the project. And then let me get back to the tax impact numbers. So scenario one, we also looked at currently our typical borrowing is what's called a level principal payment, where the principal payment is the same every year, but obviously as the principal gets paid down, the interest payment goes down each year. You could also do what's called a level payment, which is more like your mortgage, where the payment stays the same, though even that changes based on other things, but the payment stays the same over the course of the loan, or the bond, sorry, for this purpose. So scenario one was a 30-year bond, level principal payment at 2.25%. So that works out to $1.23 per thousand of assessed value. And for that $692,000 home, the year one increase would be $852, reducing each year till year 30, where it would be $520, with the average over that 30-year period of $686 over the course of that 30 years. And then we also noted that the town has some debt rolling off the books within the next 2 years that would also reduce our debt exclusion number by about $117 for that $692,000 valued home. Scenario two, 20-year bond, level principal payment, 1.75% interest. That same average assessed value home would, the valuation would be $1.49 per thousand. So year one increase would be $1,030, reducing until year 20 of $776 for an average over the 20-year period of $903. And again, offset partially by the debt rolling off the books of approximately $117 within about 2 years. So you can see, obviously, the 30-year versus 20-year. It's just like your home mortgage. If you get a 30-year loan versus a 15-year loan, you pay more, but you pay off quicker, which means you're going to pay lower interest over the course of the loan. But those are decisions that this board will make when deciding how we're going to proceed with financing should the project get approved. So happy to answer any questions, but those were what was presented on Wednesday. And then we had a whole series of Q&A on all sorts of topics.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. So let's start with, and I'll start with, let's start with the project costs and any questions and discussion on that, and then we can move to the differences in the financing options. Obviously, I don't know that we'll be necessarily in a position to make a decision on the financing options tonight. It's going to depend on what the bond market's doing as well as we get closer to it. But we can discuss the merits and demerits of either of the potential options. So why don't we start with any questions or discussion on the project costs, and I'll offer the Warrant Committee the first opportunity for any comment or question. Sharon, if you have any things to raise or discuss with us on that topic, and then we'll go to us here.
I think right now we don't have any really specific questions on the project costs. I know that we have a couple of people on our team that have been diving into it pretty deeply with Mike, so I don't think we have any specific questions on that right now.
Okay. Pete, anything you want to raise?
My question has to do with the increase in the reimbursement from the Mass School Building Association. What did we do to get the extra 2%?
Nothing. The MSBA every so often does evaluate how much they're giving to each town. There's an extensive formula that maybe they would share, but it basically every year they look at the town, they look at average incomes, they look at a whole bunch of different data points, and they decide how each town and city in the state get their what their reimbursement rate would be. So they're continually adjusted. We're lucky enough to be favorably adjusted. I was more concerned that end up going down at some point, so that was good that it went up. And given where we are with the project, if it gets approved, that would be locked in. It wouldn't be adjusted once we proceeded.
I'm glad to hear they think that we're needier than they thought before.
So am I. Every little bit helps, Pete. I mean, it amounts to a $650,000 increase in our reimbursement, potential reimbursement.
Yeah,
There's
that's
some
real money.
fluctuation based on how the project shakes out, but it's, six-figure increase. It's
Yeah.
not insignificant.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything else?
No.
Gus?
I'm actually hoping the Warrant Committee has the answers to a lot of my questions, but one quick question, and I don't know whether Nick, you or Christine know. Is the median house value in town above or below the average house value?
We can get that
We can
answer.
get that, I don't have that off the top of my head.
Because I'd be curious to know that. And then, I guess, Mike, this is down a little more in the weeds, and it's not in the information that's here. The Eversource worked with the building committee, I think, on the net zero, and obviously, we're targeting net zero. What incentives or any kinds of, Eversource contributions are included in this picture?
None. We don't use those incentives to lower the budget. They're basically like nice to haves because we may not achieve them, right? So we often don't assume we're going to get an incentive. It would just lower it at the end if we do get it. So basically, the incentives for the Eversource program, the net zero would be $1.25 per square foot. So just south of $125,000 during the construction, the design and construction document phase, and then an additional dollar if after we open the building we prove out that we're able to maintain our ultra low EUI below 25. We have to do some testing a year later, and they would then pay an additional dollar per square foot, or $95,000 to the town for that incentive.
Next question, the heat pumps, how are they being paid for?
Within the project budget.
Okay, so you don't have to answer it tonight, but I have a huge question around the Energy Committee that brought in a selectman from Lexington who came in and told us all that the net zero costs for the Lexington school were completely covered by Eversource. There was no net cost to the town, and what I think you're telling me is that the costs of all that net zero are in this project.
No,
with
not
no
entirely.
credit. Okay.
You asked about heat pumps, not the entire cost of going net zero.
So what is the, let's start there. What's the
Photovoltaics
What's the
are not
entire, I know we're contracting that out. What's the total cost on the school budget for the net zero work that we're doing? And I'm actually looking for net, because I understand if we didn't do net zero, we'd be doing something. So I'm not
Right.
really trying to
I
pretend.
mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I can get you the number on the
I'd like to
geothermal
know
wells.
that, yeah.
Because
Okay.
that was a specific ad alternate. We priced it separately. We evaluated what that additional cost, if you remember, we presented that, I believe, in March to you guys, when you guys
Right.
voted on that decision.
What I would most like to know is what the incremental cost of achieving net zero was relative to a traditional, because the measurement I'm using is Lexington.
Right.
So we've already had a town that's been able to do this using 3 or 4 year old
And I
older
still,
technology.
and I think there's a confusion about that, because I have never seen a project where something like that, an entire geothermal heat pump system, was paid outside of the project budget for zero cost.
Then I want to know from
yeah.
the Energy
Now,
Committee why they came here and
We
showed
did
us that.
explore the possibility of doing the geothermal heat pumps as a PPA. It wasn't something that there are people out there doing.
No, that's not how Lexington did it.
And it gets further complicated. The benefit of it, the easy part of a PPA with the photovoltaics is, they come and they put it on your
Yeah,
roof,
yeah.
and if you terminate, you either buy the discounted panels back from the provider, or they take them away.
Right.
You can't do that with a well.
Well, and that's not how but I like that part of it, so I'm not complaining about that
Yeah.
part. We had a serious presentation from
Yep.
the selectmen in Lexington who gave this board information that said Lexington was able to do this at no net cost. And that, speaking for myself, that influenced my position on this. And in fact, I suspect it influenced yours, because when we were back then, you were skeptical that it could be done.
I was skeptical that that the financials would work out over the life of the building, and then that was proven out to me largely through Mr. Sandin's spreadsheet, which we took as a way to help calculate all the numbers that we used to put in front of you in March. And we have all that data. That's easy to put in front. So yes, you're absolutely right. I was originally skeptical that we could make it work, but because I was hard on them. I was hard on the Sustainability Energy Committee, and I made sure that they had all the ducks in a row, and they proved it out to me. So that, yes, it was more upfront. I recognize that it was more upfront, but that over the course of the lifespan of the building, actually less than the lifespan of the building, we would get that payback and then some.
I would say in the presentation at least, Sandine said it was not more upfront. So that was
I wasn't
huge for
there.
me.
But no, but I think you're
So the
talking
answer-
about two different presentations.
Right.
You're talking about the
I'm talking about
original.
the one that the Energy Committee.
Right, but then
here
we-
before this
when
was-
we
I
made-
wasn't at, so I can't speak
Right.
to.
Yeah, and he's talking about when we actually made the decision to go net zero. We had a
Correct.
presentation from our energy consultant,
Right.
and that model reflected what the costs are here. That there wasn't
Correct.
an upfront cost.
Nothing's changed from March
what would-
when we in that regard.
Mike, I've learned over the years that I know sometimes I'm a little picky because I try to confirm things that are obvious, but I was a very clear message in front of this board that caused me to say, okay, let's go for net zero. That message was not corrected until tonight, perhaps. But
No, that's not
leave
the
that all
message I
aside.
presented to you, Gus. So, I'm sorry, but my team presented.
It's not, at this point, this is all water under the bridge. The one thing that would help is to know what the incremental cost is that we're carrying on this project for net zero.
I can get that to you, but I would again refer back to the presentation we made in March, where all the costs were outlined about what was part of the project and what wasn't, and we did
If
not.
you're saying I didn't dig into a detail in the cost you presented to figure out that what Sandine told us wasn't true, I will plead guilty, but that's not the same as having somebody tell me that we could do it at no net cost to the town, and nobody else came in and said Sandine was wrong.
I just want to be clear. I never said that to you.
Oh, no.
Nor did
Sandine-
anybody
well,
from
you
my
know,
committee.
Mike's explained that.
Okay.
You weren't at the meeting that
I was
that
not at
we
the
had
Sandine meeting,
where we were
and-
told point blank that was the case.
And
You-
I
if you-
can't
if-
speak to
I'm not
Sandine.
mad at you, but you can't understand why I'm not happy that information was brought before this board by a committee, never corrected,
And
now
I
we're having a
would
discussion.
suggest you take that up with
But
the
that's
Energy
not-
Committee then, because
So
I didn't
noted.
make that promise.
I think he might. I think he
I have
might.
no further
Mike,
questions.
I think that might.
I've got enough on my plate than to deal with the Energy Committee's issues.
Just give me that one number.
I'm happy to do that, Gus.
All right, thank you, Mike. And then on the second one, on the financing options, I think throughout the process until more recently, we've generally carried this and assumed it would be a 30-year bond, given the cost. And
That's what we originally said, and then
Projection.
when you and I talked, you said it hasn't been officially
Yeah, I mean,
stated. So we put the two scenarios out there.
Yeah.
Our thinking, just was that in a way to help minimize impact on our current residents, and it would be to go for the 30-year. But that's a discussion about whether that's worthwhile to the town. That's not in my purview.
Yeah, no, and I always want to make sure we had a further discussion about it before going, further down the line. So again, I'll start with the Warrant Committee and see if anyone on the Warrant Committee has any thoughts on this, at the 20-year versus the 30-year, the level principal versus level payment. If you've given any thought to that or had any discussions about it, and I'm not expecting a final answer or recommendation. This is at the discussion stage. We don't have to make this decision. I think we have the two scenarios so people understand what the range is. But Ed Vizella, welcome.
Thank you for having me. We spent a couple of hours this morning talking about this, and there's pros and cons of both. And what I did is I kind of looked at an analysis that looked at the 30-year bonds at the 2.25, the 20-year bonds at 1.75, looked at the total cost of one versus the other, as well as what the tax increase was going to be for each. So if you look at the 20-year bonds at 1.75, basically the pros on that is it's $9.8 million less expensive. Plus, if you take a 20-year bond, you have nothing in years 21 through 30. Big numbers to think about. If you look at the cost in year one for the 20-year bond versus the 30, it's only, one's $3,517,000, the other's $3,762,000, $245,000 difference. Now, the con is you've got to pay that same amount for 20 years. Whereas, as Mike said, the other one, on the 30-year bond, it basically amortizes and comes down. So there is a trade-off. I mean, if you think long-term, $10 million more expensive on a 30-year bond is a big number.
But it is also $10 million in 2042 to 2052 dollars, right?
True.
Right,
Discounted.
So it's discounted today. It's probably
Yeah.
I can't do that in my head right away. But it's probably it's not $10 million in 2021 dollars.
So, I mean, I just,
Could I stop you for 1 second? When you sounded like you were talking like this was a mortgage as opposed to, maybe I just misunderstood what you said. When you were
it's
talking about,
similar to a mortgage in that if you do the 30-year bond at the 2.25, the initial, year one tax increase was like $3.5 million. You go out to year 10, it's about 3.1, keeps going down. If you go out to year 20, it's $2,150,000. So it keeps reducing.
this is,
The
but
mortgage,
this is
your home mortgage wouldn't. Your home mortgage, you're paying the
You
whole.
use-
Scenarios would do that if you do level
Right.
principal.
Right,
payments.
that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
This is a level principal payment, not a mortgage.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
But I think we have two options, right? You have the 20-year versus 30-year, then you have the level principal versus level payment,
Right.
right? Which I assume are options on both.
Yes.
He's comparing,
You just get a microphone, Steve, so everyone at home can share your wisdom.
So Ed's comparing the 30-year level principal with the 20-year level payment.
That's what I thought I was hearing.
Right.
Okay.
That's what the
That's what I
options
thought
is.
I was hearing.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
So again, the year one's really not too different. But if you do it over 20 years, you'll basically save $10 million discounted, as you say, Mike,
Yeah.
for those dollars. So to me, it was, I just said, did we just jump into this 30-year bond at 2.25%? Is that just, we're going to do it without thinking through the other end of the remainder, that $10 million in year 21 to 30. So it's not a simple decision, I don't think.
Yeah, as we were looking at it, the 30-year option, level principal, gives you, because it goes down over time, gives you more flexibility with additional debt, right? Whereas the 20-year one, it's sort of a fixed number every year for 20 years. So thinking about what's coming down, from a capital budgeting perspective and major type of expenditures is important, I think, to consider when you make this decision.
Sure, to the extent that we do that based on the 30-year bond at 2.25, yeah, as the years go out, we will have savings on that debt payment, which we can offset offset operating costs going forward. And each year, that will increase a little bit, which you won't get under the other scenario. So that's the trade-off.
Yeah.
But again, in year 11, if you were going to do a new park and rec building 10, 12 years from now, you'd have freed up a lot of money.
Or a new elementary school.
A new elementary school. Just thoughts, considerations.
And Georgia, just from a practical standpoint, sort of how far in advance of the issuance would we have to make this? Yeah, you need the mic.
Right now, we are planning to borrow middle of January, third week in January, to take advantage of the low interest rates, although they seem to be climbing. We need to know probably by the second or third week in December.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Anything else from the Warrant Committee folks? Pete, any thoughts?
Well, my initial thought was to try to spread it out as much as possible, just because I guess I was thinking less impact on the taxpayers, spreading the cost out over the years that the school's going to be used more, so that the people that are using the school in years 20 to 30 pay their share of it as well. I mean, people move into town and move out of town, so it's not the same taxpayers every year. So that's about as far as I got. I hadn't realized that there was almost a $10 million lifetime savings on the, but that's, I mean, if
Probably more like
we've-
6, but yeah, I mean, if you discount it
Or
roughly,
if you discount it, all right.
I would say.
But still, that's a lot of
Sound
money. but
ballparkish, Ed? I mean, right, 20 years from now, so.
We're not paying a lot of interest. The interest rates for both are pretty low, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a sophisticated analysis of it,
Yeah.
but that's my initial reaction.
Gus?
Yeah, there's a range of thoughts that I have. Fundamentally, I agree with Pete as far as bottom line, but there's the biggest driver for me. Mike already knows I'm not on board with this price, and he knew the cost for this, and he knew probably close to a year ago or at least 6 months ago, but you specifically knew my framework, and my framework hasn't changed. So starting with a point that I'm very concerned about the total cost of this school to begin with, I've had to think through, well, what do you really, really care about? And I've realized I do care about the cost of school, but the reason I care about the cost of the school, I wouldn't care about it if, like, MSBA had announced they were going to, like, reimburse us for $40 million. I wouldn't care. Not as a state taxpayer. I'm just not there yet. But I do care about the impact on taxpayers. And that's, so if I really prioritize what's driving my views and my behavior, it's number one is the impact on taxpayers. And I have a deep, deep concern about what we have already been doing to taxpayers because of what I see. And I know, Mike, it might be because of the demographics where we circulate. I see a little bit different, I think, than maybe what you've said, because we've touched on this before. That's driving my views. I started thinking about this, and I'm sensitive to what we've done in this town to our current taxpayers is through things like OPEB, we're putting a burden on our current taxpayers to dig out of a long-term financial hole. It's nobody's fault, but for the last 50 years, municipalities didn't actually pay for their long-term financial obligations. And now GASB has set up rules where you have to do that. GASB did a good thing, even though I don't always like all the ways they did that. So on one hand, we're causing our current taxpayers to have to backfill for the long-term financial obligations that were not fully covered by the people who preceded us, to include me when I got here 25 years ago. On the other hand, we also are doing some good things, and Mike, I give you credit for being a driver on this, in terms of pre-funding our capital budgets. So we're starting through our stabilization funds to pour money into, not only are we backfilling the long-term financial obligations that weren't covered, we're starting to fill the long-term financial obligations that we can project. And we're pushing our taxpayers to do that at the same time. So now, and then the other thing we're doing is we're building 50-year buildings, and up till now, we've been funding them with 20-year debt, which says basically we're asking the taxpayers today in the next 20 years from whenever we build the building to basically pay off the building. And if in fact they are 50-year buildings, there are some taxpayers in the future that are going to have a pretty nice ride when it comes to capital investments, when all those 20-year loans are paid off, but there's still 30 more good years in the building. For those reasons, taxpayer impact is huge for me. So the idea that we would finance this through 30 years is moving some of those costs, which may be, to your analysis, I get that. I have a 10-year mortgage after refinancing a couple times. But given the interest rate environment right now, if we can lock this kind of an interest rate in for a 30-year period, and we can reduce the burden on the taxpayers today, and yes, the taxpayers from years 21 to 30 are going to continue to pay off this building, and yet will still be 20 years of life to it after that, I'm in favor of that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think I generally agree with that. And I don't think you and I disagree as much as you think we do. We can take it up at another, I think we agree on the problem and disagree on the cause, I would say. And we can take that up when the Warrant Committee aren't on like hour 17 of their meetings for today. So I was going to say to welcome you here from like a 12-hour break to your meetings, but you had no 12-hour break because you just met before. So thank you very much for that time. So I lean in that direction of the 30 years as well for that reason. I think it, the estimates we have as well from the advisors are pretty conservative. And so I think unless there's some radical change in the interest rate environment, which is entirely possible, but outside of our control, there's a chance that that 30-year moves closer to the 20-year. We had such a, do we have 8 bidders on our last round? I mean, so we had a substantial amount of interest in our last round, which obviously drives the interest rate down. And I think we went into that, George, what were we projecting for that bond?
I believe it was 2 1/4, and it came in at 1.46.
Yeah, and again, past performance is no guarantee of future results, but at least based on the most recent experience of the market's reaction to the town as an issuer, it was pretty favorable. And so we can keep our fingers crossed that if this does pass, that we'll have a similarly robust and well-attended auction when January rolls around. Okay, so I think that's our, I mean, obviously, events and circumstances could change, but I think that's kind of where we're all leaning on this, and I don't see any great objection from the Warrant Committee on that. So that was a good discussion. All right, we will segue now to our town's financial policies, which I know everybody enjoys talking about. As I mentioned, this is going to be a green eye shade sort of a meeting, so I apologize in advance. There is math of some sort in this one. All right, so just a little bit of background for those watching at home. In 2018, we adopted a set of financial policies dealing with long-term capital expenditures, reserves, funding and budget issues, capital budgeting, and all of that. And over the last 3 years, the Warrant Committee has done a very good job in enforcing and applying those policies in the course of reviewing our annual budgets. And so with 3 years of experience with the adoption in 2018 of the Municipal Buildings Capital Stabilization Fund, the creation of a regular capital stabilization fund, and then some questions about the testing of proposed budgets against this policy. The Warrant Committee this past year spent 2 meetings going through the budget to confirm compliance. I think collectively the financial team in Town Hall and I and others thought it was a good time to update the policies to make explicit the test that the Warrant Committee has employed and all the rest of it. So we have a draft that's in the materials. We've got some comments from Gus, which we can discuss after we get input from the Warrant Committee. But ideally, we could, if we could talk with this tonight, get close to a consensus and have the revised set of policies adopted for this year's budget season. I think that would be a useful exercise. So I will again start with the Warrant Committee for any comments on the draft or anything else related to the policy.
Thanks, Steve needs the microphone.
Steve?
Well, as a new member to the Warrant Committee, this was something I paid attention to and looked at. So I generally think these are great improvements, that they've made. It cleared up a lot of the confusion I had with the old policy around the Municipal Stabilization Fund and the Capital Stabilization Fund and the different names that were used, and so it cleared that up, and it also I think tightened up the the language around free cash, and I think that was really helpful. The one area I think maybe if we revisit these again next year, because I understand it's important to adopt these at the beginning of a fiscal year, is the area of a financial forecast and estimating revenues and expenditures. And this is sort of what we're doing now with the new elementary school is a good example of making a decision on a big decision when we're just focused on this one-year impact. But if we had some visibility on a 3-year basis for revenues and expenditures, we could sort of tie them together and present a more holistic picture of what taxes are going to be, how they're going to be impacted. So I think that's, but other than that, I think these are, I would be fine with these. At least I don't really have any, the one other item I noticed is that there is a, I think it's just, where is Nick here? Yeah, there he is, sorry. I guess it does show, this last schedule shows a shortfall in the 7.5% test for 2023 and 4 and 5. And I think that was because the free cash update hasn't been reflected in this.
Right.
So I think that'll be fixed, right? Yeah.
And we'll have to, once we get free cash certified and once we start plugging in fiscal 23's budget projections and future year budget projections, we'll be able to revise that as we go. But as we discussed today, if we're adding $3.5 million of debt service on a new school, that's going to shape some of those reserves and, you know, maybe stress some of those reserves coming out of fiscal 23.
Yeah, so those are the only, you know, observations. I thought it was a great, you know, I'm perfectly fine with what's here, and you know.
Yeah, I think the financial forecasting, the ability to do that has taken a little bit of a hit over the last couple of years with enhanced uncertainty. Because I think and Christine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there is a provision in the town charter. What's in the charter? In the charter of the bylaws for a 5-year forecast.
Correct.
Right. It's in the charter that it's really more known as the doom and gloom scenario that Mike would present, and then Christine would present, looking forward to over the 5 years at the annual kind of budget kickoff. And so I think it's a good idea to incorporate that. Obviously, whatever we have to be consistent with the town charter, but incorporate that into this
And it could be
policy.
built into the budgeting process
Mhm.
here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll just say, I'm not sure all of us have had a chance to read all of them yet, just because we got them, and then we know that Gus had some more comments. But I do know that there's a desire that perhaps our committee votes on them and signs off on them.
Okay.
Is kind of a new process. And so we haven't talked about that yet, but we'll, assuming the comments and everything come in, we can put it on our agenda next week.
Yeah, and we don't have to adopt it tonight, but if we can get to the point where we have few open items, and then we can have a final one to vote on.
Yeah, we were kind of hoping not to talk about the entire operating budget yet, and maybe finish the
Right.
current warrant topic
You don't want to move
first.
to like 3 meetings a day?
No. No.
In my comments, easily more than half of them are comments about how some things are worded that when I was reading them, the one that really jumps out at me is there's one place in here that talks about non-town and non-school buildings. And my twisted mind immediately went to, what other buildings do we have? And I said, maybe we're talking about water and sewer buildings, because they're enterprise funds. And I actually think what we were meaning to say was non-building capital expenses. So there's a lot of my comments there are that kind of comments that just have to do with wording. There are a couple that are
So we've
literally
already
about the structure.
dealt with Gus Murphy comment 4, because you're right, that's what it's intended to be, non-buildings.
And most of them came with suggested reword, or at least,
Yeah.
you know, I
So-
tried taking a crack at it.
So let's go through them just so we can discuss them and,
Okay.
and give you all a chance to weigh in.
Okay.
So first comment, do you want to walk through this into your comments?
If I do that, then I'll do it quickly, because some of these, I don't think I need to waste anybody's time in a meeting in a detailed discussion. The very first one on the first page was the third bullet, says to minimize variations in the tax, water, and sewer rates, and to spread the cost of providing needed services fairly across residents and businesses over time. And I just said, I wasn't sure why tax, water, and sewer rates needed to, I wasn't sure what the variation was. Is the variation between those rates? Is the variation of each one of those rates? It was just the wording, just the way I read it.
I think it's within each one, just the idea that
So
we
we're trying
plan
to
ahead.
So we're trying to stabilize the
Yes.
rates over time.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And
think
given that we
because
have a
there's a-
unified tax rate, I didn't understand the part about distributing fairly between business and, but it was just the way I was reading it. It's
Well, I think it's just because
editorial.
not only residents pay taxes.
Yeah. So that was just editorial. You have to go like to the 5th page.
Do you want to change that to something, or?
Given what you're saying, I'm not, if you guys think it needs to be changed, that's fine. I read it, hadn't read this in a few months. I read it, and I wrote down the things that jumped out at me as I was reading it. And sometimes that just means I forgot what I knew 3 months ago, and sometimes it's actually a more blank slate perspective than when you're in deep on it. So I'm not hung up. I think any of those kinds of things, if people say, look, we don't need to change that, I don't care.
Okay.
So what I'm looking for quickly is to talk about I just talked about the non-town, non-school. That's kind of important. There was a couple of things this is around reserves and it's actually around funds shall be appropriated into the capital stabilization fund each year for capital projects. I'm sensitive to the use of the word shall, because it's legal, it says it will happen. And there were two things that were there that I reacted to. One was that it said we shall put money into the capital stabilization fund, but we don't have an override that automatically locks that in. So I was asking, do we mean shall? And if we mean shall, exactly what's the mechanism that makes that happen? And then the other part in there, it says over time, the town shall increase the balance in the capital stabilization fund so that it is sufficient to cover the town's annual cash flow outlay. And the only question I read that, I said, but there might be some years when we're not increasing the balance because we're pulling more out of the reserve fund than our annual contribution. So if the wording, I mean, I know that's not what we meant. If the wording doesn't suggest that to anybody else, you don't need to change it. But when I read it with a shall, I kind of said, that says we can never take out more than what we put in each year because it always has to increase.
So on the shall, I mean, I understand what you mean on the shall, and anything that's in this policy is always subject to town meeting approval. And so when we say shall, we're really saying we shall in our budgets recommend, include in the budgets. I mean, sort of this is the policies that we've adopted.
I was reacting more to it said we will always increase the balance.
So this was a little bit, I think for me, this is a little bit, and I don't, the way I take this is, because these do get revised, where we are now, the balance is short of where we're spending. I think we get to the point where we have an excess, and that's an option. I think it might be revised. Like there's a suggested revision here in OPEB from where we were before, reflecting kind of what's happened in the last 3 years. You know what I mean? And so I think that's, I mean, for now, I would say this is the target. The target is to get the revenues and the contributions into the fund to equal our projected capital expenditures, wherever that money comes from. That's where we're.
So let me give you, but the scenario that I was reacting to here when it says we shall increase the balance each year.
Yeah.
So the very first year we set up the maintenance, the building fund. We put $1 million in, and then we immediately took that $1 million and put it into the feasibility study for the school. So we did not increase the balance that year. It didn't go anywhere. We put $1 million in, we took $1 million out. We couldn't do that under my literal reading of what this says. So
what if we change it to shall increase the balance in the capital stabilization fund over the previous year's appropriation into the fund, focusing on because I mean, for the most part, where we're going to be while this version of the policies are in effect is trying to match the capital outlay with. I mean, what did we have left over last year? What, $75,000?
Yeah, it's not much.
Roughly, trying to match the capital outlay with the contribution. And that's where we're trying to get to by identifying additional sources of revenue to contribute into the stabilization fund to equal what our 5-year projection is in the cost.
Yeah, we have 21,427 left.
21,000.
Yeah. Not much.
Probably have to see that right. So you see what I'm getting at? As long as the words do that. I'm not really trying to get us all wrapped around the axle on the exact words. Let's see, down under reserves and free cash. Hold on. No, I actually had another question on that. So it's my GM6 comment, the last part of it. So this is the capital stabilization fund. The only question I had there is, should we also stipulate that the items that are funded through the capital stabilization fund need to be in the 5-year capital budget? We put the other fund has to be in the 20-year capital plan. Do the things we fund out of this need to be in the 5-year capital budget? So in other words, are we programming these expenses, but with a 5-year window, the same way we're programming the major building expenses with a 20-year window. It's, one's a plan, one's,
I think that actually falls into the capital budget section, but it does mention that.
all right, if it's, so I guess then all you have to do is check the wording of this to make sure that it doesn't confuse. If it's addressed elsewhere, that's great.
Yeah, items not included within the 5-year capital budget should only be funded via the capital budget in the case of an emergency.
And that's
Yeah, I was
for
gonna
the
say, we had an emergency bucket inside of the capital bucket. The municipal has the emergency.
Okay, well, that was
I know
the
what you're
point,
saying,
was,
yep.
should we actually say it has to be in there to set the expectation that we don't routinely have emergencies in our capital
Right.
plan?
I'm fine adding it there, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any objection from anybody?
Then down in section 3, reserves and free cash, second paragraph, this is something, when we talked about this before, around the use of free cash and things like that, the issue isn't what our actual expenditures are, the issue is what our budget plans for them to be when you're trying to, because you don't know what they are when you're doing this. So I added the word budgeted in a couple places, because that seemed to have disappeared. I think we at one time had that. And then, shall exclude expenditure supporting the enterprise funds revolving in reserve. Reserves shall include funds available in free cash, other reserve accounts. And then my only question is, do we want to say including enterprise funds?
No,
We do not.
we do not want to include the enterprise fund.
So reserve funds and the enterprise funds do not help us with financing?
They don't show up, and I'll look to Andrew to confirm this. So a large free cash balance in our water and sewer enterprise fund don't show up on the fund balances that the rating agencies look at.
I guess
on
that
our
answers the
balance sheet.
question. Okay, then I guess that goes off, okay. That was what I didn't want to lose that.
Yeah.
That's why I asked the question, okay.
They're segregated separately.
All right. So that one goes away. DM7, delete. I'm going to skip 8 for a minute, because that one's not that critical. On the next thing down, the words that were here were, these reserves may be drawn below the minimum level when non-property tax revenue is projected to fall by more than 10% year over year. And I said, this is one that requires the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee to both want to basically break with our policy. And I'm saying, why are we tying our hands by basically saying the only time we can do that is when tax revenues fall 10% year over year? What if they fall 8% 5 years in a row? Well, we can't do it. So given some fundamental trust, maybe not just to the Board of Selectmen's intellect by itself, but certainly when you bring the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee together, that's a formidable brain trust that could probably be counted on to act responsibly. I would just get rid of that criteria and just say it takes both to kind of agree to break the policy, and who knows, maybe Martians will attack and we realize there's a new thing. Maybe COVID will hit and we have to do something that we never thought we'd have to do.
So I don't necessarily have an objection to that. I guess I'd want there to be some rubric to guide the Warrant Committee and the Selectmen in that instance, right? And so I totally agree on the 10%. That was a semi-arbitrary number. The point is that it should only be done if there's an unexpected loss of revenue, or otherwise it shouldn't be done in the way we've used it historically, which is to bridge additional expenditures, right? Or to,
Or if there was like a pandemic.
Yes, if there's a pandemic and we projected the revenues to drop, well, and then projected the revenues to drop, right? So that would be a situation where you could invoke it. I just want to have some guidance that it should be tied to a drop in revenue or some extraordinary unanticipated expense,
Yeah.
right? If something happened that required an immediate repair of something that we had to do and we couldn't access any other source of financing, then so that would be the only thing, is to just provide some
What if we
standard
did like a small checklist of those kinds of things?
Yeah.
Or it may be that the way to do that is to give a qualitative example of what would constitute a
Right.
good thing, and possibly even to specifically call out another thing that would not. So to your point about not wanting to be just used willy-nilly, that, you know, we could say, but it not for purposes like just balancing the budget or something like that. So that part, I just don't like the idea of us binding selectmen in the future, warrant committee members in the future, and it's like if anybody thinks they can't, you know, figure it out responsibly, well, we can speak for ourselves whether we need to tie our own hands, but putting it into a policy that's presumably just doesn't seem
I
right.
think you can just use a term like extraordinary circumstances or something like
Okay,
that,
I'm
rather
okay
than
with that,
10%, because,
or-
I mean, you're going to trust the people that are leading the town in the
Okay,
future.
yeah. So you get,
And they can always change the policy if they wanted to,
right,
anyway.
right.
There's a bunch of warrant committee people nodding with your extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. Extraordinary is a good word.
Done.
Okay. So, okay, and then, 11 is a wordsmithing. I just, from my standpoint, it would be good to clarify something. Under free cash, I'm going to skip 12. That's just a technical question to make sure I understand what it says, and I explained it. Don't need to debate that. It says the town shall not, where am I? Got to find the line here. Enterprise fund, minor point, enterprise fund retained earnings. My only question is the 20% number, is that something that the Water and Sewerage Board is comfortable with? We've got it in our policy. I think, Nick, you said it was kind of policy. I think that's a practice that they followed anyway, I believe.
We'll circle back with them, but
Okay.
that would be below where their practice.
Okay, so my only question is, if we're having a policy on the enterprise fund, they ought to weigh in on whether they're okay with it. And then under the, talking about the surplus from the overlay, the comment I think you made was that it kind of has to either be a one-time expense or it has to go into reserves. And my question, this may be a really dumb question, I was getting toward the end of this thing when I got to it, but my question is, could we just say the surplus goes into free cash, and then we figure out where we want free cash to go once it's there?
I was able to get an answer, so I had to
Okay.
ask. So if the surplus was released and the town did not appropriate it when it was released, it would just close up to free cash automatically.
Okay.
But the insertion of this would be to say that if it's released in the spring, the town's not going to just use it to offset the overall budget. It will if it's going to use it in developing that year's budget, it'll go to one-time expenses because it's a non-recurring revenue. It might happen
Okay.
only every few years.
Okay, I got what you're saying.
Variation.
Or we'd put it in the reserves, because that's again another place where we'd put one-time revenue. Okay, I get it, all right. And then the last comment I had was at the very end, on item V5, proceeds from the sale of town land. And first, I think it's a typo, the thing that says undesignated fund, I don't know what that means. But the real question is, right now, it says, to the extent permitted by law, the proceeds of any sales of town land or other assets shall be deposited in a reserve, stabilization, trust, or other fund, or reserve against the town's long-term liabilities, or to retire existing debt, or otherwise to reduce long-term, non-recurring liabilities. And why did I put what I put there? Also, this says the proceeds of town land, I know why. It says the proceeds of any sales of town land or other assets. So when the highway department gets rid of one of their old pickup trucks, or their old dump trucks, and wants to sell it, is this saying that those proceeds will come and go here? Because that's what it sounds like. When we talk about other assets, that's not qualified, so all other assets says everything that we sell comes back through this channel, and I don't think that's what we intend to do.
What happens now when they, on the
Usually
rare
we use it-
occasion?
On the very rare occasion, we use it towards the trade-in. I'm trying to think, we authorized Mo on his sale, and now I can't remember off the top of my head where we authorized
Typically,
his.
it'd be a trade. Last year, the DPW auctioned off some equipment,
Yeah.
and it's just going to close out to free cash this time around. So it'll be rolled into the total free cash certification. So
I think we had talked at the time when Mo brought that forward, when he wanted to
Mm-hmm.
start auctioning some of older equipment, we talked about putting it back into capital, where it
Mhm.
was capital equipment, so I don't see why we couldn't keep that in there.
Yeah, we talked about it and then we just,
Yeah.
we didn't
I don't think we
do
ever
anything
act-
formal. We just
Yeah,
had that
let 'em
discussion.
auction it.
Okay, so my point is, when I read it, I get confused. The land part, we've talked about, any sale of land, that's gonna go into reserves, but when it just said other assets, it's like, well, other assets is a broad category. And-
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we talked about it with capital in terms of Mo's things, it was about whether or not we were ever going to do a warrant article so that if he was going to auction off things and say he got $20,000, he would have almost like a revolving fund that
Right.
20,000 would go in it and then he could apply it to something else.
Mm-hmm.
But we never actually set that up. I think we just had talked about it. So I think that this is basically setting it up townwide than necessarily saying to Mo, if you sell $10,000 worth of stuff, you get to use it. It's more of a, I guess it goes more in the control of the capital budget committee or whoever.
So if this is
And
what
then
we really
town
want it to
meeting.
be, if that's what we really want the policy to be, I'm good. It's just that I read those two words, other assets, and said, are we sure? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else we'd use it for. I mean, I think it would be I think because it says to fund or reserve against, I think it would probably fall within this policy if it was used to buy a truck, right? I mean, if you traded in and bought a truck, I mean, what this is getting at is that we shouldn't be selling off one-time assets for recurring expenses, right?
Right.
Or non-capital expenses.
Right.
So a trade-in for a truck, to put that towards another truck, that seems to line up, as opposed to trading the truck to, pay a salary for a year and then
Yeah,
how do we
yeah.
pay it next year, kind of thing.
So then maybe we're recognizing an exception that if it's an exchange, we're using the trade-in of a truck to offset the purchase price of a new truck, then this policy doesn't apply.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that would still be funding a long-term liability, long-term
Yeah.
expense. All right, anything else?
That's all I have.
All right. Anything else from the Warrant Committee? All right, so I think we're in pretty good shape on this one. You all can take this up at one of your 15 meetings next week and squeeze it in among everything else. And,
We can allot 5 minutes to this next Tuesday.
we'll address Gus's comments and have a final draft for
October 5th?
voting and approval. Anything else from the Warrant Committee?
I don't think so.
All right.
Anybody have any? Nope, I think we're good. I was gonna say, we have another meeting tomorrow, so.
Okay.
In that you're all here, I'll pass on my personal thanks. As much as it was undoubtedly tough to slog through the meetings that you actually held, I slogged through the recordings of all of the meetings I could find that you've actually held, at least in the month of September, I think, maybe not the very first one. And I think you're just doing a tremendous job for this town. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, next up, we are here to interview candidates for the Cemetery Commission. Are Jen Caruso and Nancy O'Neill here?
Jen is here.
All right.
Nancy did just email, that's why Georgia left. Apparently the door was locked when people left at 7:30, so Nancy was not able to get in, so she is joining us on Zoom. But she was here, just we couldn't let her in.
She's probably the Nancy.
I think
would
she's
hope.
Nancy.
Hopefully is Nancy. All right, just a little introduction here. We have an open spot on the Cemetery Commission. It's a 3-member board. We've had one vacancy for quite a while, Christine. I mean, when did?
Yes, when Mr. Manganello passed away.
So 3-member commission. The commission is size is established by state law. Mark, is that right?
Correct.
As a 3-person board, and we have fortunately 2 candidates who stepped forward to offer their services to the town on the Cemetery Commission. And so, consistent with our appointment policy, we'll interview both of them here. I guess they're listed alphabetically, so we'll start with Jen Caruso. Welcome. We just need a microphone, and you can either go to the podium or get a microphone, or just so everyone else can hear you. Can we get her the microphone?
Somebody took it with them.
That's good.
Ah, there we go.
Mike took the mic.
All right, and welcome to Nancy on Zoom as well. Welcome. Do you want us
Thank
to
you.
just tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in the commission, and then we'll have any questions that we have.
Sure. I am a lifelong resident and fourth generation and have pretty vested interest in the cemetery and the future of it.
I'm sorry, Jen, I'm having trouble hearing.
Well, the microphone is just for people at home, so
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
You can talk loudly.
you can talk as loud as you want here, but
I'm just a lifelong resident. I've been here for, my life and fourth generation, and have a pretty big interest in the future of the cemetery. I have history with the cemetery and my background. So when this available seat came open, I decided to put in for it.
okay. Thank you, Pete. Any questions, comments?
No, I guess your background and your interest in the cemetery commission are the main things that I guess I'm curious about, so thank you.
Yes.
No, I appreciate your willingness to step up, and I appreciate both of your willingness to step up. So thank you.
The only question I would have, and this is for you and for Mark.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Yeah, is whether, given your business, whether there's any issue of conflict or any circumstances where that could be a question from the standpoint of overseeing the cemetery.
So I am not a licensed
Okay.
funeral director, and that would be the only, from what I understand.
It's more complicated than that. I think you would have to contact the State Ethics Commission, give them a full disclosure,
Mhm.
and get the advice from them as to your participation.
Okay.
And also, the ethics law applies not only to individuals, but to their immediate family, which is spouse, siblings, parents, children, so it's pretty broad.
And did that not apply, years ago?
Let's just say whatever happened in the past, happened in the past.
Just saying.
New sheriff in town.
Okay, yeah, so I guess that was my only question about it, whether that would present any issues, and it sounds like you've got to work through that with the State Ethics Commission. Do you foresee any issues from your standpoint?
We don't deal with sale, we don't deal with anything that has to do with the cemetery truly anymore, other than our familiarity with the property, and directing our families. So I don't, but my only interest is obviously the future of the cemetery and preserving it and everything that is obviously, the rules and all that applying.
I'm going to guess that this is an issue that has come up before for the state in terms of the review by the Ethics Commission. No?
It's a, no harm, no foul situation if nobody complains. And historically, nobody's made an issue of it.
Yeah.
So it's been
But
below radar.
I don't believe, that was some time ago, I believe, if we're talking about my father's involvement, years ago. Is that?
Whatever happened back at that time doesn't matter. It's
Right,
now
right, right,
going
right.
forward.
Right.
And I'm not the ethics police. I can't even give you a binding opinion. So that's why the enforcement agency for the state is the Ethics Commission. They have two functions. First is advisory. If you go to them in advance and lay out the factual situation, they will advise you. They will tell you you've got a conflict that's unavoidable, you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they will say, you can do it, but you've got to watch out for this, this, and this. So it'll be fairly specific.
Okay. Anything else for Jennifer? No? Okay, all right, Nancy, you're up. Let's see if we can get Nancy up on the big screen.
Looks a lot like Chris.
That looks. That's frightening.
Can you hear
There we
me?
go.
Yes, we can hear you. All right, and so if you want, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in serving on the Cemetery Commission?
It's pretty much very similar to Jen. I'm almost a lifelong member of Medfield. Pretty much born and raised here. Went through the school system. I live right across the street from the cemetery. I think it's one of the prettiest ones that we have around. And my interest is simply to, volunteer to do something for the town, as well as preserve the cemetery as it is, make it better. I know one of the concerns going forward is space, and just thought it would be, nice to join a committee where I could help out.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Sorrell.
So ironically, the living right across the street from the cemetery is something you also need to run by the Ethics Committee.
Always a tie.
Because
right.
they're my neighbors?
Well, it sounds then like you both have homework to do. And
Could I ask one question to both of you? If you listened to me at our last meeting, when both of your names came up, my quick reaction to both of your backgrounds is that I would have loved to have both of you on this committee, ethics issues aside. Without necessarily saying who, and what I learned was, no, there's only one person that could be a member, but we could appoint an associate member. So in terms of literally, assuming you can get past the ethics police, literally, if you both have an interest in serving on the committee, there's a way, I think, that the selectmen can appoint you to the committee, with one being an official committee member and the other one being an associate member. Would either of you object if that were the outcome, without knowing who's
No
which?
objection.
No, I wouldn't object. I mean, I would prefer to be a voting member, but I would certainly do whatever is asked of me.
Okay. Well, okay. Well,
That was
thanks.
my hope, that we were going to end up in that position eventually, and that I've always believed that the most important thing is actually just having a voice at the meetings. And I'm sure that whoever is the associate would be given voice, so.
all right, well, I think you both can check in with the Ethics Commission, and then we'll hear back. We may go from 2 terrific candidates to none by the time they're done with this, so hopefully that won't be the case. But thank you both. And sorry about the issue with the door, Nancy.
Oh, that's okay.
All right.
You might be one of 3 people who does not have a key to the town hall.
And there were probably 3 other doors that were open at the same time, but
That's the main difference.
I went to the front door and I went down back, and
Okay.
neither one.
That may be the main difference between being a voting member and an associate member, that whether you got a key or not, apparently.
I'll be in touch with you both by email, and I'll send you the contact information to make that call.
And thanks to both of you again for being willing to do this.
Sure. Thank you.
thank you both. All right, next up, we have abutters to Danielson Pond to discuss Danielson Pond. And Dan, welcome, abutters to Danielson Pond. This has been a long-awaited meeting. This has been in the, in the offing for a while. So thank you to those of you who wrote about this issue, and thank you to town historian Richard DeSorger, who I saw his name in the attendees. There he is, for his history of the pond. I appreciate it very much, and we have a memo as well in our packet from Christine with what's been going on with Danielson Pond recently. So, Christine, do you want to just start us off? Or?
Can I just ask a question? If there's anybody who's on the Zoom who would like to be a panelist, I know there were a couple people who said they would only be able to participate through Zoom, and they'd like to be a panelist.
Yep. Thank you, Christine. So if you want to raise your hand or put your name and address in the Q&A, we will promote anyone on the Zoom who'd like to be able to speak in this portion of the meeting.
Richard DeSorger's there.
Oh, Richard DeSorger. Tom
I
Braun.
believe this is Tom. Tom is calling in on his cell phone, so we will allow him to talk.
There's also a Tom Braun just on there as well.
I believe that's his house.
Ah, okay.
There we go. Okay. Is that everybody?
We get Tom as well. All right, welcome Richard and Tom via the Zoom. All right, Christine, do you want to start us off with just a little bit of
Just
the
a little
background?
bit of background. So the neighbors had reached out this summer to us. Obviously, this project has been ongoing since the 2019 annual town meeting, and several of the neighbors reached out this summer and were looking for an update. In the course of that discussion, they asked if they could come speak to the Board of Selectmen to talk about what the future of the pond would be as a whole. And I know we talked about it briefly, and then Richard DeSorger was kind enough to send us overnight a complete history of the pond before we even asked for it.
It was in the paper, the hometown weekend.
Yes. So we were able to coordinate a date this evening, and I believe there are several representatives of the neighborhood who are speaking on behalf of the neighborhood and have some questions for the Board of Selectmen and just an overall, would like to talk to you about the pond.
Sure.
We
Who's
just
up
need the
first?
microphone.
Well, I.
If you could just give us your name and a name
Oh,
and
sorry.
street and.
My name is Mary Ellen Breimer. I've lived in this wonderful town for 40 plus years. And the pond has always been beautiful. And you have the whole history, I think, which was. And so would really, all the abutters would love to see this pond be fixed, the dam there. And in the years I've lived there, I've seen so much activity, kids playing hockey, canoes out on the pond, and you probably have that. And so would really like to see that if we could keep that in a good state. That's about it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay, I'm just a little confused because I actually.
Just get just your name and.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep,
No worries.
Geraldine Bergonzi, and I'm at 7 Homestead Drive, and I'm right behind on the pond. In fact, we built our house 27 years ago, and we own a strip of land that goes around the entire pond out to Route 27 because that is our legal frontage. So, I thought that what was happening tonight was that Pear Engineering was going to be presenting to you the costs and the options for repair. So I didn't realize that we were actually, so is that part of the program? Let me just ask you that.
That plan has not been finalized yet.
Yeah.
We're still waiting for that.
What? Well, that was to fund the 90,000 that was funded last year was to go to Pear Engineering to do their research and evaluation. And I have talked with one of the people at Pear, Alan, I can't remember his last name, Orsi or something like that. And from what I had understood, I thought he was presenting to the selectmen what they had determined.
Not yet.
So that hasn't been done
They're
yet.
still working on finalizing that.
Okay. Well, I guess, what I'd like to say is that being one of the original purchasers of the Ritchie estate when it was divided up, basically there was 25 acres of land that they built 4 homes that were developed. Walter Reynolds, who you might know from the town, built our houses, myself, Joe Clare, and 2 of the houses up on 27. And when we purchased the property, originally I was actually supposed to own the dam. And then they came to me and said, along the process, they said, wait a minute, we're just going to make the line over here. We're not going to give you the actual dam, the earthen dam. And I didn't think anything of it, and but although it's probably best that they didn't give it to me.
And I'm thinking exactly the opposite.
That's for you.
But anyway, so
the offer may still be there.
As is.
Plan C.
Yeah. But obviously, when I saw the property and decided to build, on the dam, on the pond there. The whole reason we built our house was because of the pond. And and I thought that having 6.5 acres of land around the pond, basically we had bought a certain amount of insurance that certain things could not change, So I guess, I'm wondering from the town's perspective, when the Richies gave the pond, and I had been told that it had a little offset their taxes at the time. That, this was a gift to the town, and we, as the abutters, would like to know a little bit more about the language that was involved and the deed, and, how did that exactly, how was it worded? Because for us, to lose the pond would be to lose everything, because our homes, the whole point of our homes was to be built on the pond. And obviously, we don't want it to turn into a swamp, which is what it would be, pretty mosquito infested, and that would, impact the value of our homes, never mind to the, the entire community. But in terms of our actual original investment, to all of a sudden be told that, wait a minute, the town is not going to honor their agreement to take care of the pond. And, as long time, abutters, that's really disappointing. So maybe Joe Clare would like to say something, because he bought his house and built his house at the exact same time I did, which is 93, 94.
Hi, Joe Clare, and moved to Medfield in 1980, I think it was, up on Henderson Way, and used to ride by the pond every day to work over in West Roxbury and back. And when the land came for sale, I got in touch with Walter Reynolds, and we bought the 9.5 acres on the backside of the pond, knowing that Bergonzis were going to own around the strip, and that Walter, originally that was not going to be the case. That was changed from when we put the deposit down. He said it was going to be donated from the Richies to the town for conservation land, so that they could keep the pond and maintain it. So I moved all of 1.5 miles and built the house on the backside of the pond, just for that same specific reason that Jerry did. And I'm wondering, and Mark, maybe you can answer this, is there a document from the Richies transferring the pond over to the town?
I don't know, actually. That was before my time as town council. I was on the planning board at the time that came before the planning board, and there was discussion at the planning board in terms of what was going to be given to the town as part of an approval for the subdivision. And the lot layout. I believe they ended up getting an extra buildable lot by reason of the negotiation that occurred at that time, but you'd have to go, it's a long time ago, you'd have to go back and pull the planning board decision.
Would I go to the Dedham registry?
No, the planning board archives that probably have it right here.
Okay, I'd like to.
Well, I'll have Sarah pull that out tomorrow.
Okay, that'd be terrific to find out what was in fact worded in there. We didn't hear anything about getting the extra lot. It was my impression that it was so the town could maintain the pond and that everybody would have access to it. They gave access to it off of 27. They built a little walkway with a fence so that people could park, walk out, use the pond, skate, fish, whatever they were doing with it. I guess, do we have an idea of where the town stands on the pond? Last time when we had the meeting, I guess it was 2 years ago, I thought maybe it was 3. I was under the impression that it was moving forward and there was support for revitalizing the pond, and now nothing's happened in a few years. Do you have any idea of where the town stands on this, or the Conservation Committee?
We have a member of the Conservation Commission and Mo Goulet, DPW Director, are present.
Hi, gang. So, Hi.
You need no introduction, but why not?
I'm Bobby Kennedy, Conservation Commissioner, and we've had a couple meetings similar to this with the COMCOM, and I believe The outcome was to move forward and put it in the hands of the selectmen and the people of Medfield to see if they wanted to move forward with the project. And it was, Power Engineering's not done with their evaluations. They'll be coming and putting in front of us some choices that we will have for the pond. And the process isn't finished yet, that's all. It just takes time. You know, they've been doing a bunch of work. They did, we tried to get it evaluated so it wasn't a poor quality dam and high hazard where maybe we wouldn't have to do as much of a dam or work to it. So there was a bunch of levels and a bunch of permitting that has to be done on the dam in order to keep it going.
They did determine
Or just
that
if you're
it
gonna,
was a
if you,
substantial hazard.
if you could just use the microphone, just so people can
Okay.
hear the.
According to the person I spoke with, I don't even know if this is on.
No, it's
okay,
actually, the
I
microphone
can
is
hear
just
you.
for people at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry. When I did speak to him, he did say that originally they thought that the dam didn't pose that much of a, threat, and that if the dam did actually break, the water would not actually, impact anyone. But they changed that and said that actually they raised the level to substantial, and they think that the water would actually flood 27. So by changing it to substantial, I just assumed that meant that it can't go unnoticed for, something would have to be done.
So, my name
Mr. Sorrell?
I just wanted, for context purposes, so everyone's on the same page. The starting point here is, this is being driven by the state. There is a Division of Dam Safety that's gone around evaluating dams throughout the state by reason of some failures that have occurred in the past. And they're now imposing requirements. They do an analysis, and based on that, they determine what you need to do to bring your dam into compliance, or require you to do the study to justify that it's okay.
Right. My name is Maurice Goulet. I'm the Director of Public Works. And as far as Department of Conservation and Recreation sent a notice of non-compliance for the dam. When that happened, we were assisting the Conservation Commission through the Public Works to hire Power Engineering to come out and assess the dam. The appropriation was made at town meeting to have them look at the dam to see if it is a significant hazard dam. It did prove to be a significant hazard dam. I know maybe at first they didn't know whether or not it was, so they confirmed that. That was part of the original study. With that came emergency action plans that they had to develop for that dam before the repairs could be done in case something did happen to the dam. Since then, between them looking at proposals to see what it would cost to replace the dam, what work needed to be done, they're working and finalizing that right now. That takes a long time to study, to look at it. In the meantime, the DPW, with the help of the Conservation Commission, we went out there to do some minor repairs. Now, these were just Band-Aids. They weren't permanent repairs, just to stop the seepage through the areas that were deteriorating. So if you notice, the dam has been lowered only because through recommendations from PAR was to leave it a foot below the seepage area to make sure that it didn't breach, especially during a lot of these precipitation events. And we're going to continue to do that through the fall until once the proposal comes back to see how much the dam would cost to repair, it has to go to town meeting and then be voted on. So at that point, then it's going to be decided how to fund it and go from there. So we're still in this, the stages that we're moving forward. DCR is satisfied with our, moving with Power Engineering. They've been in total contact with them ever since we started this. It does take a long time. It's something that can't be rushed through, and so we are working towards that goal right now. So we are waiting for the proposal, and as soon as that comes in, we'll see where we can go from there.
Well, you can imagine it's really frustrating because 27 years, and it's like the dam, the pond used to be, the surface was 8.5 acres. The surface now is, I don't even know if it's 4. It's so overrun now by foliage and growth, invasive growth, that I don't know that we could ever even get back to where the pond was. But, the continual, keeping the water level down, it's just made the pond basically disappear.
That is
I
our
mean, and it's been
recommendation
so
from
long.
the consultant. I mean, we're trying to be safe out there as well. We don't want that to breach, especially during these precipitation events. I mean, at times we could bring it up, but if it breaks through, then where do we go from there? That's all.
So I guess, the question I have is, and some of us have, is it absolutely something that the town would vote on? In terms
What do
of,
you mean by that?
well, I mean, it's like, why would it go to the, to the general public,
For the
the
appropriate-
residents, all the residents, to determine what's going to happen with this pond when that is not, when we bought our property, that's not what was stipulated. It was,
Well, I mean, I guess it depends. I mean, the factual answer is if you want the general public to pay for it, the general public gets to vote as to whether they pay for it. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? I mean, if you all wanted to pay for it yourselves collectively, you probably wouldn't have to have an appropriation. But if you're looking for the town through the budget to pay for it, it has to go through an appropriation at town meeting. Everything we spend has to go through an appropriation at town meeting.
I did put together a little tax information for you. I don't know if you saw it.
You did, and I will say that, I mean, if that was applied to every group of 23 houses that could put the same information together, that would cost the town a lot of money. Now, not every group of 23 houses lives next to a pond like Danielson Pond,
Yeah.
which is obviously not just a benefit for you all, it's a benefit for the town.
Yes.
And so it's a town asset. And so, but I think the question is the funding question and the money question, right? Where does the money come from? Who pays for it?
Yeah.
What's the process? There are some grants you can get from the state that we've been working on and all of that. And so usually we go in a different order, but just from that's why it's got to go to town meeting. If you want this to be a general appropriation from the general budget or from some source of revenue, that's there. And I think this one concern that I have, but one thing that I think is important, that we sort of treat like cases alike, and that we don't have a situation where, I don't know how many other Danielson Ponds there are in Medfield. Maybe only one, right? But I'm talking about some sort of something that's an aesthetic benefit to abutters, that increases the enjoyment and benefit to abutters of their homes. And how do we deal with that, right? That you have some things that benefit some people more than others as opposed to generally.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I'm not saying I'm against spending the town money on it. I'm just saying from a practical standpoint, you don't want to be in a situation where you have a lot of these things. And this is one thing, to the green eye shade conversation earlier, right? This is one of the things we've been trying to get a handle on in town, is what are these sort of longer term liabilities? What are these expenses that we have? What's the sort of denominator we have to deal with, right? And I will tell you that I'm not sure, until recently, right, that the Danielson Pond Dam was not on any roster of capital liabilities or expenses or projects for the town. It is now, right? It's something that's on our radar screen and we're trying to figure out.
Right,
but it's largely it's a funding question, right? And we get similar questions from people who live on private roads, who don't want to be on a private road anymore, or want sidewalks or whatever. And I think your situation is quite different in that it's not entirely naturally occurring, but it's been here long enough that it's mostly natural at this point. It's been a pond for so long. That we should address it, on its own merits. But just philosophically, that's just the one concern I have with the idea that because of the taxes we pay, we should pay to maintain it. I think if it's a public good and a public benefit, that's why we should maintain it, regardless of whether you pay $5 in taxes living there or whatever, right? I mean, if it's going to be something that's a public expenditure. So that's just a philosophical point that I think we just have to think about as we go down the road, and we don't want to create precedents that either are fair or unfair to you or to others who might be in a similar situation. So I don't have a position on it one way or the other. I think I would agree with you that it should be maintained. It's beautiful. And it doesn't sound like there's any environmental issues with maintaining it. So, but it's a financing question. So Pete, I'm usually go in order with Pete first. So Pete.
I had one more thing I wanted
sure.
to ask. I think, Bobby, wasn't a study done on the number of ponds in Medfield? I thought I remember that at the last meeting, that there were 4 of them.
Yeah, there
I
are
thought there was a
several
presentation.
ponds that the town does maintain, that the town does own, and we treat and do analysis on. Danielson Pond is one of them, and yeah, there's 4 or 5 of them. Cemetery Pond, Flynn's Pond, just town owns ponds.
Yeah, I think that study was done, and that the presentation of how many ponds, if I remember rightly.
There were 2 registered ponds in town, Kingsbury Pond and Danielson Pond. Those are the only 2 registered
Dams.
ponds. Dams, I'm sorry. Dams that DCR will inspect and report on.
Pete, comments,
So,
questions?
so years ago, we,
Pete's got the floor, you guys.
was there somebody else that wanted to speak first?
It's surface water from up on Southern Acres and from Elm Street School out behind there, right behind your house. And there's probably springs in that area too.
Yeah, there was a dam there that has not been functional or used in years. That's on
Behind your
a little
house.
aqueduct that goes over, correct?
Yeah, the farmer built it.
Can people hear me?
Oh,
Tom would like to speak.
all right. Tom Braun from Zoom World. Pete, we'll get to you.
Oh, great. Great, thank you. So just a couple of quick things. Did everybody involved in the decision read my letter that I submitted a while ago?
I've read your letter.
Does everybody who may not have read it, Kristen, does everybody have access to that letter? Because I don't want to drone on and on about the pond if everybody's read it or has access to read it.
Should have it. It was in the packet.
It was in our meeting
The
packet.
selectmen
Yeah,
packet.
I've read it.
Okay, good. Thanks, because, I think, to sum it up, I'm saying that the pond is a gem and has been a historical gem for a long time. And it's actually astonishing how much wildlife is in that pond. And there's no hyperbole at all in that letter I wrote. It is an amazing place. And I know it sounds self-serving because I live on the pond, but it is a gem for the entire town. It is used almost daily, especially before the latest problems with it, by people all over the pond for a variety of activities that I've outlined in the letter. The wood ducks came in today, by the way, if anybody's ever seen a wood duck, it's spectacular. So I just want to make sure if everybody could do me the favor to read that, I'd appreciate it. Secondly, I'd like to thank the Department of Works gentleman, I didn't quite get his name, for the Band-Aid repairs that you did this spring and early summer. They were very helpful, and I think the pond would have had a very, very rough summer if that had not been done. So I do thank you for that. This pond absolutely can be saved. I had someone look at it just a few days ago who works for an engineering company and a chemical company, and he said it'd be no problem saving this pond once the dam is repaired and restored to its former glory. So hopefully Para Engineering will agree with that. Fortuitously, the 2 of the Ritchie children stopped by. They've done this periodically over the years, but about 2 or 3 weeks ago, 2 of the daughters stopped by, drove in my driveway kind of randomly, and they were showing their daughters and a couple of grandchildren, where they grew up. So they grew up for years here and we're going on and on. So I did have a chance to ask them about that document, which Joe Clare and others have asked about, because I think it's a pretty critical document. But they said absolutely the intent of that was to preserve that pond. And they would be heartbroken and very disappointed if that pond was not maintained. And why else would they donate it? Kind of segueing with that thought, the legal counsel gentleman brought up that he was on the planning board, and part of that was so they could squeeze out another lot. So I'm not a lawyer, but I am pretty capable of analyzing intent. And if the town is squeezing in another lot, valuable lot for someone, and here's what we get in return, no one in their right mind would say, then we'll just let it run into a swamp. So we'll give you this and get nothing in return. So I think that's a subtle but important part. Another thing I hope everybody keeps in mind, and I know some people from the Historic Society are on this call, but is the history of this pond. It's not just that it has a bunch of ducks and that all the people living around it bought with the intent of living on a pond. Now it could turn into, let's be honest, a disaster. There's a huge history of this pond, and I would urge everybody to try to at least read up somewhat on that history. My house was built in 1689, the original part. So we're going way back. And the pond's not quite that old, but it is very old. And in the basement of my house, we have lead-lined ice lockers that went with, they were carving chunks of ice for refrigeration. So, it's not just the mill. It's the way the town has used this property. There used to be swimming in it, that they were harvesting ice, that they were grinding mill, and that it goes with the house that goes back to 1689. And I drive up and down 109 recently, and you're seeing the Clark Tavern come down. And I know there's lots of reason why that's happening, and I don't know the details, and I'm sure, at some point maybe that was the correct decision, but you cannot drive by that house without saying, there goes another piece of history. And I'm not gonna live on this pond forever, but it's been passed on for over 300 years, or put the pond part, a little less than that, but the house, the house without the pond is, what happens to my house at some point? Do people just, some builder comes in and mows it down and no one cares about the pond? So, I hope we take in the history of the pond. And then my last point, which is probably fairly obvious, is when the cost comes, obviously we'd be netting out the cost to decommission the pond, right? So if it costs $800,000 to repair and it's $500,000 to decommission, hopefully all the net costs would be front and center. And that is pretty much what I have.
All right, thank you. Pete?
Mr. Brown, I do want to assure you that I read your letter back in April when you originally sent it, and again, because it was in the packet this week. Mr. Clare, I would suggest that the pond study that you have been talking about might relate to the fact that maybe 15 years ago, the town decided that we would take care of our ponds a little bit better because they were getting overgrown, and we actually started spending some money to clean out the is it the milfoil, Bobby?
Yeah.
And I don't think that we've been doing that recently, have we? Because we ran into financial difficulties.
Yep, and we've been catching up with that particular invasive plant, but there's other ones that are out there that the pond maintenance continues around town.
So my attitude on it is I love the look of it. I have gone to the dam, and my daughter, that's where I used to take her to fish when she was growing up. You don't have enough fish in that pond. So for me, it's a very pleasing aesthetic thing. It's part of the town. But I think it gets down to the cost issue. If the town's willing to spend the money to whatever it turns out to be, and we're waiting to find out that figure, I guess. But it sounds like it's a lot of money. And then it's up to the town meeting as to whether they want to spend the money to do the work.
Just one last thing I wanted to add on the Richies donated the pond, but there's also about an acre of land that goes with it. And, you know, without the pond, the acre's pretty much useless, right? I mean, no one's gonna go to that. So it's more than pond.
Thanks, Tom.
Before I say anything, my first request was to hear from our town historian, and I see he has his hand up, so I think he wants to talk. Richard, I'd appreciate hearing your perspective on this issue, particularly around the significance of the pond to the town's history.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. First of all, thanks. I just want to echo a little bit what Mike Marcucci said earlier and what Tom said about the history of that pond. And it's not just the neighborhood. I certainly value very much what the neighbors say if I lived right on that pond. But this is a town-wide issue, I think, not just a neighborhood issue. And as Pete just said, it's a gem in the town, and it's something that, you know, that makes Medfield when you go by and see a beautiful pond like that versus a drained swamp. I mean, you're losing a valuable asset to the town if you lose that pond. And Tom went into the details of all the many different ways of through nature, through sports, in the summer, winter, spring, and fall, that pond is used. And laying on 27, and Bobby Kennedy and the crew did a great job of clearing the area between 27 and the pond, so that you used to be able to see the pond clearly. Anyone coming into Medfield would see that. So it has the history, it has the just environmental, you know, more and more we look at climate change and things and the value of having ponds and things like that. So I would feel very strongly it would be in the best interest of the town to maintain that pond. The one question I had, and maybe it's down the road, but both the president and the Congress are debating this infrastructure bill, and in the event that that goes through, I know it includes dams. Is that something the town could begin to our representatives and senators to see if there's some way that we could be on that list? I don't know the details, it hasn't even passed yet, but something to think about in the event that that passed to alleviate some of the costs. I realize that that's a big issue. So that was my 2 cents I wanted to add on that. Thanks.
Richard, can I follow up with a question for you? This might be a little bit of a tough question. First, your comment there, my first thought was, I guess we have to figure out a way to have a controlled flood of Route 27 just to make the sustainability argument a little more compelling. I'm still coming up to speed on all this and trying to sort this all out. Here's the question I have for you, Richard. In round numbers, it sounds like this ultimately could cost someone, the town, $1 million to fix. Perhaps it's a one-time fix and it's the only time we have to do it, unlike AstroTurf on football fields that has to be swapped out every year or every 10 years. If we where I started thinking was a couple of years ago, the Dwight Derby House was having some difficulties. The Lowell Mason House that is still struggling to try to restore that. Perhaps if the town had $1 million in an account somewhere 10 years ago, the Clark Tavern would still be there. My question for you as our town historian is, if we had $1 million, if the town decided to put $1 million into historic preservation, would this be at the top of the list? Or would other things, where does this fall?
I think it'd be, I'll just make a pitch. I think Medfield misses the boat not being on the community preservation, passing the Community Preservation Act, because that would fall in that. And right now, Medfield, if you go ahead and pay for that, if you could call that open space, and I'm not sure that Mark Sorrell probably have to comment on that, but if that was considered open space and you could put that cost in that, I think it would be up there. But by not being part of the Community Preservation Act, Medfield's going to pay the full cost of that and not get the benefit of other funds that would come through real estate and through the state. But I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. But I would say it certainly would be up there.
Okay, thanks. Again, off the top of my head, without thinking things through with what we've said tonight, the way that I would look at it is the first question in my mind is, I don't know if there was a deed of gift, but whatever the legal transfer of the property was, it seems to me the first question is, what were those terms? I would actually be surprised to hear that the terms were that the town committed to maintaining the pond, not so much because the town wouldn't do it, but because it might not have crossed anybody's mind to even address that in any legal sense. But there is a legitimate question in my mind. If there's a legal agreement that binds the town, that sets up one thing. If it's historic, I think what we heard tonight is the historic significance, right? I know you all live near it, and so you directly know why aesthetically it's good, but I'm saying from a town standpoint, if there's not a legal mandate, then it seems to me that then there's a question of the historic significance and potentially, to Mr. Brown's comment, or the environmental significance. So there's two potential ways that an argument could be made that it's in the interest of the town to maintain the pond. And if we get to a compelling argument for that, and we have a good solution, and we can't find grants, and I think that's definitely worth some hard effort to see if that we could, then it ultimately does come out to whether the townspeople are willing to put the money up to do it. I live up on Harding Street. I can tell you, 10 years ago or so, when the Maple Leaf Farm, the old Scribner farm, because of deaths in the family and the need to divide up an estate, the town did come forward and say, yes, we'll spend, and that was, I think, $750,000. So it's not unprecedented for the people here in town to value something in town that they don't necessarily use on a daily basis, but just value it for its own worth. So I wouldn't just, if that's where we had to go, I would not assume that that's an insurmountable obstacle. But right now, with what I know, that's sort of the way I would look at the circumstance.
Mr. Sorrell.
Yeah, I just throw into the mix as long as Richard is still on there. But probably the basic problem here is when dams were constructed of that age, it's not like they were engineered out. There were just people around that had experience building dams, and if they were successful, the dams held, they had a reputation for being successful, and they created them. But they probably don't meet today's engineering standards by any means, and now when you have to go in and retroactively deal with it, now suddenly you have like DEP imposing that, and that's what makes the cost skyrocket.
Right. Okay.
That's all I got.
Anyone else have comments or questions? I mean, I think from the town's perspective, I think we have two assignments. One is the completion of the whatever it is, study on what the cost is, what the engineering would be, and then the second is developing a plan for funding it.
I would add a third one to that, which is to find out what the original arrangement was with the Ritchie family.
Yeah, third, and find out what the original that's the third part, to figure out how that would fit into the budget. I mean, it does not fit into the budget, so it would have to be a source of revenue that's not part of. We don't have $1 million available in our.
There was a state program last year that included dam remediation, because they're pushing this all over the state.
We applied for it, but we did not receive it.
But I mean, they're pushing it all over the state. There's dams all over the place that are threatening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like bridges, you know. They're out there.
There is a caution with that because the state's focus has been on removal. So the grant program is heavily favored towards removal. So that is something that the town will have to.
So it's a good thing we didn't get the grant.
Yeah. I mean, is the idea like restoring the natural flow of water and stormwater run, all that kind of stuff?
And the watershed associations are really big on that.
To remove the dams. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I'd asked that question at a meeting one of the meetings when we talked about this, kind of what about the history and then what the environmental impact is. So I think that's kind of the three town assignments. We'll figure out what the deed says, come up with what the proposal would be for funding it, and then finishing the study so we know what the cost is. Because I do think this is to Gus's point, a decision to put, if it's going to be funded by the town, to put before the town meeting, for the town meeting to decide if they want to accept the funding mechanism that we would propose. And sitting here at the moment, I don't have one, but there's a couple of potential options that we could have for the spring town meeting on that front. So, do we have a sense, Bobby, what the timing is on PAR, when they'll be back to us?
Yeah, I believe PAR is near the finish of the proposed design paper, and it's been working with Nick too. Nick's been doing a great job trying to get money and funds for whatever we can get. So the town is actively looking for revenue streams to try to keep the dam project alive, and I believe it'll be this fiscal year.
We anticipate the study later this fall.
Later this fall.
Yeah.
There you go.
Bobby, how did we end up with PAR Engineering?
Power engineering is, DPW chose power engineering because they have a very large dam engineering section, and highly recommended, done many dams, and we're very pleased, and I think you will be too. They're going to give us choices, and it'll be different levels of repair and removal too. So it'll all be put on the board for review.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say one more thing. You've been patient all the way through this process, but during the fall and winter, we are going to keep the pond relatively low because of the Band-Aid repair that we had done, just to be safe, on the safe side. If PAR gives us the recommendation to raise the pond, we'll do that, but try to be patient with that as well. We'll do the best we can to try to not to deteriorate it any further. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for having us.
I don't know if I should commend everyone or chide everyone that we haven't had a single damn pun through this whole discussion. I mean, really. I thought for sure, Mark, we would have, you would help us out here.
No, that was Mike Sullivan.
No, I know. I
Don't
mean,
confuse us. He would have had many.
Oh, I know. All right.
As soon as we get the study back, we'll set up a meeting. Yeah.
Is Chief Carrico?
He's here.
He's here. Oh, wow.
I gave him an 8:30 time, right? I was not.
Not too bad.
I said 8:30.
It's not bad.
I assumed that there was some sort of, just let me know when I have to come.
Yeah. Possibly.
How you guys doing?
Good.
We're good.
See you.
Good to see you.
Just give it a minute for.
Access to 27 was part of the planning board decision. My recollection was a board decision that gave us access around the post. And we had the space on the front side by 27. And Concom.
We should introduce intermissions to our Board of Selectmen meeting.
All right.
No, it was absolutely attractive. The whole property.
Thank you. All right, we welcome Chief Carrico from the Fire Department for a fiscal year 22 operational update. Welcome, Chief Carrico.
Hey, good evening. It was about almost a year ago that I was in here talking about staffing issues with everyone. And in that time, thank you to the efforts of the Selectmen and my begging and trying to steal people from other towns, I was able to hire 6 new employees on the call force, 5 of which are EMTs. I have a 7th, which is a rehire, Bob Tangway. He used to work for us many years ago as an EMT, so he came back to us. There was one employee that I just want to recognize. It's Liam Frazier. Liam was a member of the Fire Cadet Program, and he served in his junior and senior year in high school. And then I finally finished the brainwashing, and he became a call firefighter in May.
Excellent.
So he's now in Firefighter 1-2, and he's doing very well. So all of our candidates are attending the call volunteer program that's being done over in Millis.
Excellent. That's great. That's really good news, Chief.
Yeah, and we are going to we're going to continue the Fire Cadet program this next season. It was Captain Harmon was in charge of it, so we're just going to have to take a step back, rethink it, get some people to in the right positions to run it properly.
And are you still taking applications for call firefighters?
We are always taking applications. The AFG grant season has ended, and I have a SAFER grant for call firefighters that's still out there. So when they open up that grant, we'll see what happens. So I have 3 applicants already that have no experience at all, no EMT or anything. And if you recall that when I talked about the SAFER grant pays for all training for the call firefighters. So it'll give them EMT training and give them Firefighter 1-2. It pays for all their equipment, all the physicals, everything. For full-time staffing, I'm pleased to announce we have 2 medics on every group. I do have 2 people that need to go to the full-time fire academy, and they are scheduled. One is attending in middle of October. The other one has a date in March. For last fiscal year, we had 187 box alarms. So 187 times we had to call people back because we either didn't have enough people or we had no one in the station to respond due to multiple calls. And right now we are tracking about 50 calls less than last year. And one of the things I'd really like to bring to your attention is this year we've already had as many second medicals in 9 months as we had all of last year. So the amount of medical calls that we are coming up against is increasing. I've even had to go and create a 3rd medical call in our computer system because that's how deep we've gotten sometimes. I already talked about the SAFER grant, the AFG grant. For capital purchases, A2 has been ordered, and it's about 2 to 3 months out. Brush 1's been ordered, and I'm at the mercy of Ford Manufacturing because we all know what's happening with chips, and I was told 16 weeks, 20 weeks ago, so it's going to be a while. Engine 2 is going to arrive this week. I was told that it's almost completed. Buttoning up a couple of things today, and I'm hope to see it tomorrow. Car 1 has been in the operation since August 30th. The power low system is installed, and then the battery jaws has been ordered, delivered, and we've already put it on engine 3. We did have a little problem with one of the cutters. It had a chip issue, so we had to send that back. We're going to get a brand new one and replace. Department needs.
I got to ask, Chief.
Yeah.
So with that wrecked car that was out in front of the fire
Yeah.
was that practicing with the new
Yeah, every
equipment?
year we try to
Okay.
bring cars in.
Okay.
And now it was a perfect opportunity because we had just purchased the battery-operated jaws.
Okay.
So it was just great timing, and you guys had a great time, and the tools worked perfectly. Having battery-operated tools eliminates the need for a power pack. It eliminates the need for hoses, hydraulic fluid. When you all of a sudden you got to go and use the equipment, and then the power pack won't start, so the jaws don't work. So battery-operated, push the button, they start. So it's really good. For department needs, we really have to start thinking about staffing the 3rd member. If you remember back when we went ALS, we were not filling the 3rd member because we were saving on overtime and we were running 2. But now we have 2 medics on every group. High acuity calls call for 2 paramedics responding. We are a much better department when we have 3 members on. I've been trying to go for grants to find money to supplement the overtime. And any time that I have any extra money in my budget, I try to bring on the 3rd guy. It's the right thing to do. It's safer for everybody. So in this next upcoming budgeting year, I'm going to talk with Christine about staffing that 3rd guy. For capital projects, we have portable radios. My portable radios are in terrible condition. They were new 25 years ago, so we have to start cycling through. So I was going to piecemeal it and do a 12,500 every year, but it just, we're in such bad shape now, I'm just going to try to do 45,000 and replace everything. The AEDs and all the equipment need to be replaced. Ladder 1 needs tires. Apparently in NFPA 1901, you can't have tires that are older than 7 years old on a fire truck. It doesn't have any exclusion, like depending on your mileage, or there's nothing. It just says flat out 7 years. The ladder truck tires are 2006. Squad 4s were 2012. Engine 1 was 2006. So engine 1 and the squad had to be replaced immediately from our DOT inspection. The ladder truck can wait a little bit, so we're going to replace those with a capital project. Then the new engine's getting airbags. That was another capital project. One of the biggest issues that I'm facing right now is fire alarm monitoring. If you know that the fire department has radio boxes throughout town, so we have 68 radio boxes, and we actually monitor the fire alarms for different facilities in town. The company that operates the program that runs the fire alarm equipment has said on 1/1/24 we're no longer supporting that software, so you're on your own. You can either come with us and pay, every person, every station in town will pay $200 to them, or you're on your own. So at first I kind of bought into it, but they wanted to use our radio equipment to bounce the signal over to them. So I kind of got a little upset with that, so I started trying to find an alternate program to run that equipment. The first quote that I got was $70,000. The other two companies haven't called me back yet. So that's going to be something that we really have to think about in the next year, is do we want to maintain this fire alarm system, or do we want to say we're not going to do it anymore, we're going to get out of the fire alarm monitoring business, and then tell all those people that we monitor they have to go to a different central station.
Can you just give can you just give them an example of who you're monitoring so they understand?
Yeah, it's like the town hall. So the
well,
town.
You have to keep monitoring me. A better example.
Oh, okay. Well, it's all, you got to think, there's 13 town buildings that we are monitoring, and I don't charge you for your monitoring fee. But the remainder of those towns, I'm charging $180 a year to monitor those facilities. So Shaw's, down at Shaw's, they have a fire alarm that's connected to the sprinkler system. It's in the building. It's also connected by a radio box to the fire station. So what happens is if somebody pulls the alarm or somebody sets off the system, a signal is sent over to the fire station. The dispatchers see the signal. They dispatch the fire department to a fire alarm at Shaw's. That's how it works. But what will happen is in the future that if I don't find a replacement for the software, basically if that system dies, we're on our own. We're going to have a whole bunch of radio boxes that aren't being monitored that used to be monitored.
What is the alternative to who else?
Well, we tell everybody they got to find their own central station, so they got to go and find somebody to monitor their systems, and it's going to be a little bit of an increased cost for some.
A private company or?
Well, it could be. Well, see, we have the software system that we have is called AES, so it's manufactured here in Massachusetts, and some of those fire alarm companies use that software and some don't, or those hard components and some don't. So if for the town hall say, well, I don't want to use you because you get mad at me. Use Shaw's. So,
you can't stop monitoring me. This building has burned down twice before. I'm a key component of monitoring.
So Shaw's, so they have AES equipment. So if all of a sudden they can't find somebody who uses that equipment, they have to pay for brand new radio components. So it could be up to an $8,000 increase just to change to a different vendor. So. So it's something we got to think about. And the toughest part is with COVID, nobody was calling you back. And now I'm still calling companies saying, hey, look, I need to find a replacement for the software. And I'm getting nowhere.
Chief, how many buildings are we monitoring other than the town buildings?
Well, it's 68 total, and then you subtract the 13 out. So that's what we have. And I had sent notices to everybody saying, hey, look, this might be coming down, and just be prepared for it. And I've been giving updates to all of our clients that we have out there. It got as bad as Wilkins Glen tried to, they had like 3 buildings on one radio box. So they wanted to break up each building as a separate fire alarm. So building 1, building 2, and 3 are all separate. The vendor wouldn't sell them the radio box. Eastern Electronics. That's who runs the software. So.
Because they're getting out of the bit?
Well, no, because they want all of our, they don't want to have a standalone monitoring at the fire department. They want to take the revenue.
Oh, they want everything to go through that. I got
Correct.
it. Okay.
Correct. And it's really difficult trying to find vendors. So that's about my biggest challenge that I have right now, is trying to figure out the whole fire alarm issue. But we
So
have another.
they're trying to move from straight sale of equipment to a subscription type business
Correct.
model.
Because they do that also. So this was like a side business for them, and they developed the software. And the one software that was $70,000, Rhoda over at Dispatch, she had used it in Central Falls, and she said it was terrible. So it wasn't. I need something that's user-friendly, because it has to be, it just has to be user-friendly. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. Really, that's all I have. It's pretty much status quo at the fire department, and we're running calls. And
Pete, any questions, comments?
I was wondering how many of the shifts are 3 people shifts now versus 2?
no, all the shifts are at 3. It's when somebody takes a vacation day or a sick day or personal time. And what we were doing in the past is the first person that was out, we weren't filling. And really, if you think about it, having 3 people going on a medical call, especially if it's a high acuity call, say if you're having chest pain, technically by standard, I need 2 paramedics responding on that call. And then if we put you on the cardiac monitor and you're critical, then I need those 2 paramedics need to be in the back of the ambulance, and I need to have somebody driving. And that's what we typically do. If it's a lower acuity call, the 2 people on the ambulance will go to the hospital, the shift commander will stay back, and I still have somebody here who can run calls in Medfield. So it's good to have that third person all the time. And at first, as we were developing the system, we were in the crawl, walk, run phase, and we only had 1 medic on a group, and it was all part of that learning experience, and we had to borrow medics from other communities. If you remember, Gus, we had that agreement where we were pulling in a second medic. Now we're self-sufficient. Now we're actually delivering services to Dover. We're delivering services to Millis. So they're calling us for ALS, which is a good thing. So we can make revenue from these other communities.
So how many days a year is it that you're looking to have fill that third shift?
Well,
position?
it's planning on it. I'd like to do it, 365 eventually.
I'm just wondering how many we have with only 2. So I'm trying to
I think
figure-
it was 43 times, I think, since January. You have to remember, I had gotten a staffing grant for COVID, and when I have excess money in my salaries, I bring people in. So,
Gus?
This is kind of a dumb question probably, but every time when you give us statistics, the one thing I always look at is the table that shows the recalls and the recall percent. And I see people that are all over the map. And I'm trying to understand. I think what that means is that there's some people that, by virtue of their circumstances or perhaps the timing of calls, some show up more frequently than others. But I always look at those statistics and say, so should I see some of this as being bad news, some being good news? I don't know how to, I see the differences in the percentages, but I don't know if it's telling me anything.
well, I track everything, and I like doing stats, because it basically tells a story of what's happening within the department. And the people that are always coming back on recall are your people that have been here for the longest period of time. Like Deputy O'Toole, a great guy, knows his job, loves the town of Medfield, loves Medfield Fire. He's coming back for everything. He has the ability to leave the water department and comes back when he's working, so he's basically always around. You may have a firefighter like John Kraus who lives in town, but with COVID, he was here more. But now that I'm not sure if he's going to go and going back to his office more. So you'll see his numbers probably drop a little bit compared to obviously to Deputy O'Toole. And it's trying to engage those younger members. Like I have 7 people basically on the call department that are new on the roster, but trying to engage them and getting them to come back. One of the guys is an EMT with Fallon Ambulance, so 2 days a week he's gone for 24 hours on each shift. He's a younger guy, he's got a life, he goes skiing, he does things. He's not married and boring like me and is always around. But, it's sometimes it's tough to, why these guys aren't coming back. You give them the opportunity, you try to encourage them, and then sometimes you get them and sometimes you don't. It's a couple of the people that we just brought on are stay-at-home dads or work at home, so they're available. But it's trying to engage them and get them to be part of the organization.
The other question I had, and this is something I've actually been meaning to follow up with you probably for 2 years. So, and I'm not looking for a detailed report tonight, but when we did the ALS projections, when we first went for the override to get the ALS up and running, we had revenue projections. My sense in that first year, because the staffing, I think, actually ramped up faster than we'd modeled, was that the revenue was ramping up faster than we had modeled. And so I had a sense in that first year, everything was happening faster in a good way.
Yep.
I have a vaguer sense that everything has continued to grow in a good way. I'm thinking revenues here. But I've never actually sat down with you and said, is that true? So
Yeah, the revenue is definitely better.
Okay.
It's definitely increasing. When we have to pull in mutual aid companies, we have to technically by agreement in Norfolk County, we have to split the revenue. So if we can be more self-sufficient and keep our people in the ambulance and not have to work, bring in out of town, we can collect more revenue. So we are doing much better. And I think it's exceeded anybody's expectations that we had right at the very beginning. I think we were rather conservative, and in a good way.
Good thing.
It was
Yeah,
a good way.
yeah.
And then unfortunately we got the 8 people. It took some staffing changes, but for the betterment of the town, having 2 medics on a group is better for everyone.
Okay.
Anything, Nick or Christine, anything else? Yep.
Chris Potts, 7 Curve Street. Just one thing that you had mentioned, I was just purely curious about, was the increase in the medical calls. What has changed of the nature of those calls, and what type of calls are they? Is it due to an aging population, or is it due to something else?
You know what? If I could figure out fire department responses, I would be a millionaire advising fire departments. It's just strange. We're 47 second medicals into this year in 8 months. But we're 50 calls less than last year, so it's hard to explain. One of the things I think I've seen is, for some reason, people seem to be just a little sicker. Some of the calls we're getting are requiring second medics. Is it a side effect of COVID? Because we had considerable amount of people here in town. Are that those people that had contracted COVID now having some lingering medical issues? I'm not really sure. It's just kind of crazy. And one day you'll have 12 calls, and then the next day you may have 2 or 3. So it just has this cycling, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason. You get a beautiful day and you go crazy, and then you have a day like today that's raining, and you're just staring out the door looking at the rain.
Is this over the past year, or is it a longer span when you say it's increased?
Well, it's over the last 12 months.
12 months, okay.
Significantly that I saw, yeah.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious.
Yeah. But who knows what will end up in the, consistently we're doing 1,400 runs a year. I think it was 1,414 last year, and the year before it was more. So it depending on what happens going into the fall. All right.
Anything else? All right. Chief, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll keep reminding people that we need call firefighters.
We are actually going to hold 6 and 8 on the agenda for this evening.
Okay. All right. So we're then going to vote on committee appointments and reappointments per the committee rosters attached to and posted with the meeting agenda. All right. Can we do all these at once, Christine?
I believe so, yes. Until you get to the Energy Committee. The Energy Committee is requesting an increase to the size of the committee, so that'll be something you want to discuss.
Actually, before we get there, based on what you sent out, Christine, I'm assuming that under committee study memorials, are we adding Ron Griffin and Paul Fiscaldo?
We are.
So they are also part of the reappointment?
They have been asked to be appointed.
Okay. And did I have any other questions beyond?
So we're going to skip the cemetery committee and the energy committee and do the rest.
Yep, I think you should discuss energy separate.
All right. And we don't have a candidate for the council on aging.
We are working on that.
Okay.
So Perry had offered to be reappointed until we find somebody. And actually, Roberta and I met today and discussed we may have a candidate who's interested. They just wanted some more information.
Well,
So
Perry's not even
This
up,
doesn't
though.
require a reappointment, it's just not
Oh, I'm sorry,
accepting the
no, Perry does not,
resignation.
yeah.
Okay, so we're not accepting the resignation yet.
We are not accepting his resignation.
We're reappointing.
I don't
Rich.
want to accept his resignation ever, but yes.
Yeah, got it.
We're reappointing Rich and Katie.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to remember, last time I did this.
Before you make a motion, Gus,
I have to do it by name?
Well, I think Pete has a question first.
Oh,
on the committee to study memorials, I know that the Legion had interest in people joining there, and so I think that Paul Foscato and David Connors are some of those. Were there others from the Legion that were interested in joining?
Ron
So
is
we
the-
reached out to Ron, and these are the names that Ron had people get in touch with us that'd be interested in serving.
Okay.
So we differentiate who we're reappointing. I'm trying to remember how I did this last time. We're differentiating who we're appointing from who we're reappointing. And so for those committees that we're reappointing everyone, I can just say reappoint everyone on the committee. It seems to me I had to call out
You
names.
can say reappoint and/or appoint as listed, if it's
Okay.
non-controversial.
Okay, all right, okay. Then, and we'll do one committee at a time or the entire batch?
I would suggest you take,
I think you do the whole.
yeah, I don't see why you can't
Yeah,
take them all.
do the whole
Just
sheet.
Okay.
read off the committees and just,
So what I will do is I will comment on those where anybody who picked up our packet, where I wrote something, like with Ron and Paul. So are we ready for a motion?
I am ready for a motion. Peter,
All
you
right.
ready for a motion? All right.
Yes.
We're all ready for a motion.
I move that we reappoint the members of the Capital Budget Committee as listed in the appointment list here, associated with, that accompanied the meeting packet. For the Committee to Study Memorials, I move that we reappoint the members that are listed, the first three members listed, and Ron Griffin and Paul Foscaldo, and
David
appoint.
Connors. And David Connors.
He's not a reappoint, is he? Or is he an appoint?
They're all appoints.
They're all reappoints. They're all reappoints.
No. We have 3 reappoints.
This would have been easier just to
4
do by name.
appointments.
Ron and Paul are reappointments.
No, they were not on it.
No. I think you can make your motion to reappoint and/or appoint
Okay.
the following committees.
All right. I move that we reappoint and/or appoint the members of the Capital Budget Committee, the Committee to Study Memorials, the Kingsbury Pond Committee, the Medfield Wildlife Committee, the Medfield Day Committee,
Memorial Day Committee.
Memorial, yeah.
the Memorial Day Committee. You guys got me all confused here. And
Cemetery and Council on Aging.
the cemetery commissioners who are up for whose terms expire in 2021, and the Council on Aging members whose terms expire in 2021, as listed in the accompanying list
And you could actually do
in the meeting packet.
You could actually do the Energy Committee reappointments, too.
Well, let's just get this one done.
Yeah, let's get this one done.
I'm afraid if we interrupt the flow here, we could be here a while.
I don't want to do this again.
Do
you
we have a
guys.
second for this motion?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Okay, with regard to the Medfield Energy Committee, I move that we reappoint Cynthia Green and David Temple.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right.
And with regard, so
Now we have
we're
the
done.
discussion about increasing the size of the Energy Committee.
There's a request to increase the size of the committee and to appoint Jim Redden and Andrew Jura.
Do we have letters of interest from Jim or Andrew?
I don't believe they've sent letters, just the commission's recommendation that they be
Okay.
appointed to the committee.
Is the,
I hadn't posted it publicly.
Yeah.
In terms with the new policy, so we have not yet solicited
Okay.
that.
Okay. So you're going to post, did the Energy Committee indicate what roles these two new members, maybe you know, Pete, what's the role that they're coming in to play?
Jim Redden is hugely knowledgeable about energy issues. He was actually at the Energy Committee booth on Medfield Day,
Okay.
giving out advice to people.
Okay.
I think he's been working with Nick. I think he's focused on our vehicles.
Transportation.
and our fleet.
Yeah, and he spent some time working for, I'm forgetting the name of the company, a large energy providing company, so he's got the technical background. And Andrew Jarrell works on solar projects, I believe. I don't want to misrepresent, I believe he's an engineer. Not on the financing side necessarily, but on the technical side.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is last year when the Energy Committee expanded its size, at first I challenged that just on the sheer size of the committee, and then Fred came back and said, well, actually what it is the Energy Committee is, we're kind of dividing and conquering, we're moving in several different directions. So what's behind my question here is to get a sense of why the Energy Committee wants to add these two people, with the idea that they have a reason for wanting to do it, not just to make a bigger committee for the sake of having a bigger committee. So we'll post the vacancies.
Yeah, just on the, I'm just trying to understand. So we reappointed Cynthia Green and David Temple for 1 year, but a bunch of other people's terms expire in 2023.
We're changing it to 1-year appointments.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We had multiple years before. Okay. That was them. All right.
Yeah,
that was
to
that.
be in line with the other advisory committees that you have, we're changing that to
Gotcha.
1 year.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. So we're going to post that opening. Is that the plan? And we'll take that up after that period of time. All right. Okay. All right. Consent agenda. Medfield Youth Lacrosse request permission to post signs from October 1st, 2021 through November 16th, 2021 to advertise the registration window for spring season. And the Council on Aging requests wine and beer permits for the following fall/winter events. Wednesday, October 13th.
Oh, you know what? Those are not all on October 20th.
I have the
There's-
I have the corrected date, because Roberta's memo
Yes.
had.
Okay.
So if you want, I can call those out.
Why don't you call out the correct
So
dates?
the 4 dates, COA request wine beer permit for the following fall/winter events: Wednesday, October 13th, 4:30 to 7 for Oktoberfest. Wednesday, October 20th, 4:30 to 7, men and retirement. Wednesday, November 17th, 4:30 to 7, supper club. And Wednesday, December 15th, 4:30 to 7, holiday supper club. And I have one question on the first consent item.
Sure.
Only because they called out the locations for the signs as Hartford, Maine, Transfer Station, Harding and North, South Street, Route 27. We've had 4 locations that were the
Yeah, so
standard ones.
when I send this back to Dave, I send them back the approved locations and the policy, so they know
okay,
exactly
so
where
they'd
they
be
can put it in.
corrected.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you will notice this is slightly longer than we normally allow people to have the signs up, but given COVID and all the teams trying to get everybody registered, I'm kind of giving everybody a little more leeway on that.
And for what it's worth, I don't automatically think the 2 spots that they called out that we don't have on our list are all that bad, Hartford and Maine and Harding and North. I assumed it's at the Fork, so it's not.
Hartford and Maine is a really bad intersection.
Is it from a visibility standpoint?
I mean, just from what's happened, either accidents or near accidents down there.
It's a bad
So that's
design,
bad.
yeah.
I think it sounds like the perfect thing to send to the safety committee to have
Yeah,
them review.
okay.
There we
Well,
go.
okay.
Do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the 2 items on the consent agreement.
With the dates as stated by you.
With the dates as stated by me, taken from the official memo received by Roberta.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Any opposed? No. No meeting minutes. Town administrator updates.
Did you skip item 8 on purpose, or did I miss it?
Skip
holding.
what? We're holding.
Skip.
Yep, we're holding.
6 and 8 are being held.
We didn't hear it, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Oh.
I think you two are talking amongst yourselves, Bill. If you were paying attention, you would have heard that part. Yeah. Sitting in the back row talking to each other back. They don't know what's going on. Here we go. You didn't hear what we did by your house, did you?
I do realize the only reason Bill showed up were for item 6. Otherwise, we would have taken a night off. But
All right, town administrator updates.
I just have one update. I just wanted to say how great it was, Medfield Day. Just the weather was fantastic. It was so great. I've never been that excited to not find parking. It was just absolutely fantastic to see everybody out and see the community come together. So a really nice event once again.
Excellent. All right, next meeting dates, October 5th, October 19th, November 2nd, and then the November 7th special town meeting. I hesitate to say this. I think we may need another meeting in there, given that we probably have to have a meeting with the development committee that's a sort of single-purpose meeting unless you tell me otherwise.
We're meeting tomorrow night, so I can raise that as an issue. It's probably, by this time, I would think that they'll have something to, it may not be final, but
Yeah.
I've already conveyed that you both would like to be involved, and it probably makes more sense to get you involved before it's going final, not just simply as a
So
done deal.
we had penciled them in for the 19th.
Okay.
I was holding that open, but if you want to do just a single purpose, we can.
Well, let's
add another one in there.
hold that for now and see how things accumulate.
Okay.
And if it's going to be, if a lot accumulates and we need to split it up, we can do that on the 19th and something else on the 26th
Okay.
at an additional meeting. All right, Pete, your report.
Todd Treyabenko and I worked at the Medfield Foundation booth together on Medfield Day, and so he and I talked a lot about Medfield State Hospital, actually, so that was very helpful. The Medfield Foundation Legacy Fund has issued a call for people to apply for grants. This is the second round of grants that the Medfield Foundation Legacy Fund is doing, and it's a fairly short deadline, so anybody that's interested, any sort of nonprofits in town should go to the website, and it's a very simple process. And then there'll be a number that are selected, and there'll be a pitch it, a Shark Tank type of a presentation for certain people, and then the grants will get awarded, so all within a very short time frame. The Energy Committee's Tom Cap group, of which I am a subcommittee member, is a Town of Medfield Capital Action Plan. It's working on creating the capital action plan for the town.
Climate action.
And that's been very active, actually, meeting every couple of weeks. And then Medfield Day was just, it was a very nice day for the town, for the residents. We were very fortunate on the weather, I think, because I had heard it was going to rain a lot. And but I think that Memo did a great job of putting on another great event. That's it.
Gus.
I'll echo both Christine's and Pete's comments about Medfield Day. Every year I go to Medfield Day, and with the aspiration of making it all the way around all of the different booths just to see what's there. And this year I actually made it up from Meeting House Pond all the way across to the front of the Unitarian Church. That's as far as I got, which is farther than I've ever gotten before. I would like to publicly express my appreciation to Selectman Peterson for bailing me out of the jail. I am indebted to you, because I'm sure I wouldn't have made it to the Unitarian Church if I'd stayed there.
That was despite Selectman Murby yelling at me from behind in the rope line where we were being arrested and taken across town, that my function, being directly behind the horse, was to absorb the horse's kicks so that he didn't get injured.
You are the senior selectman among the three of us here, Pete. It's only fitting. So anyway, that was the slow progress is the number of people you run across that you get into conversations with. So that was enjoyable. I did pick up one suggestion from one of the Redcoats, who happens to be a friend of Dick Judge's from Westwood, who pointed out, now that you guys understand how this works, what normally happens in the towns that are good at this is they establish bounties on each of the prisoners, and basically you don't get out of jail until enough people have worked. Like, instead of, we got out for like $20 or something, but you start like at 100 or whatever the bounty is, depending on how much of a rogue the person is. And I predicted that the three of us will be in a healthy competition to see who can have the highest bounty put on their head.
I think if the bounty were any higher, we'd all still be there.
So
Let's just go back to Duncan booth.
So that was one. I did make sure there was no tar and feathering plan for this one before I signed up for it. I've already recognized the Warrant Committee's the job they've done, but I have spent about 12 hours since our last meeting on the videos, watching everything that I could. They're very informative, all around the school issue, obviously, but I appreciate the effort they made, and I appreciate the information I got from that. And then tomorrow night, the Development Committee will be meeting. We had, where we are in the process is we had done the preliminary evaluations. We got the comments in from the special committees that did their own evaluations. We submitted follow-up questions to both proposers on things that came up in the course of our evaluation of the proposals. Those answers have come back in, so we were asked to update our preliminary evaluations based on anything that came in. So tomorrow night we'll be talking about where we stand with regard to all of that. And that's it.
Thank you. So I'll echo what everybody said about Medfield Day. It was great. We had a great time as always. It was great to have it back. It seemed to be as well attended and enthusiastic as ever. So it was great to have it back and have it be normal. I think there was so much going on at the booth. This was probably my least expensive year in the ride area, which is normally a substantial drain. Not quite as much as the Winter Carnival, but close. And but there was so much to do at each booth. I mean, everybody really did a great job. It was a lot of fun. It was great. Congratulations to Memo. It was a terrific day. Just one upcoming thing. We have our first scheduled collective bargaining meeting tomorrow with the police union, and so we'll be kicking that process off then. And I think that is all. We've had a couple of capital budget committee meetings. The capital budget committee is just about done, and so consistent with our financial policies, we will be presenting a proposed capital budget to us. Is that for the 19th as well? What is the?
That is the 19th.
Also the 19th
Those
as
are the
well.
two items I
Yeah.
had on the 19th.
So that's the expectation, so that would be hopefully in place at the beginning of the budget season rather than at the end. So, unless there's anything further, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Sure.
Pot, 7 Curve Street. Just a quick footnote. I wish Mo were still here, but I think I always forget about this the day after Medfield Day when you walk around town, how clean everything is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our crews around town just do a phenomenal job, and I just thought I wanted to mention that because you can't see anything. There's no garbage, there's nothing around town, and they do a really good job. So I just want to mention that.
At the end of Medfield Day, the DPW trucks were just lined up along North Street. There were a lot of them and a lot of people, and they were just all there with their blowers, and they really did a great job of cleaning up. You're right.
It seems like an hour afterwards, it's like you don't even know it happened. It's amazing.
Right.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
All right, that's a good note to end on. Motion to adjourn.
Move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I'll see you everybody next week.
See you next week.
So, you know, well, man.
I think we have a few.